Thank you. I want to thank everybody for being here. My name is Councilman Anthony Coghill, and welcome to the post-agenda on the state of the Pittsburgh Police Force. I wanted to have this meeting to go over a number of things, and we'll get into that shortly, but if we could start with introducing ourselves. We have the administration here, and we have FOP Lodge 1 representatives from both, and we could, Ms. Frank, we could start with you, please.
I'm Lisa Frank. I'm the city's Chief Operating and Administrative Officer.
Jake Pollack, Deputy Mayor and Director of the Office of Management and Budget.
Lee Schmidt, Public Safety Director.
Jason Lloyd, a detective with Bureau of Police. I do work for the President of the FOP.
Joe Nicholas, Vice President, FOP 1.
Robert Schwartzwalder, President, Fraternal Order Police, Fort Pitt Lodge number 1.
Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We do have council members Barbara Warwick at the table with us, Councilwoman Erica Strasburger, and Councilman Bruce Kraus, who chairs Public Safety, so thank you for being here. All of you, appreciate it. So first I want to start, Jason, I want to thank you for the wonderful charts you put together, tracking really the numbers of the Pittsburgh Police Force.
Thank you, sir.
And what I really wanted to emphasize at this meeting today, to me, our most pressing thing in the Pittsburgh Police Force is the dwindling numbers that have occurred over the past so many years. Let the record show Councilman Bobby Wilson is with us as well. And I'd like to start really, the way I'd like for this to go is to take about 10 minutes and just go over those numbers so you and the public are familiar with the amount of police officers we've been losing, ones we're scheduled to lose, and other topics that I hope the administration and the FOP Lodge will touch on. Okay, so I'm going to spend the first 10 minutes just going over some of the charts that I kind of stole from you, Jason, and consolidated a little bit more, you know, and then we'll start from there, and then eventually we will turn it to questions for council as to anything that they might have. Okay, so thank you, and bear with me for 10 minutes here. And then after I go through these numbers, I would like responses from the administration and from Lodge 1 as to any or all the subjects that you'd like to touch base on, okay? So, Blake, could you put the page up with the... Okay, so first of all, we went back to the last recruiting class, okay? The last recruiting class that the city of Pittsburgh put on was in 2021. Probably scheduled in early 2019, but the last time we had recruits on the force that graduated was 2021. So we started with that year. In 2021, as you can see behind me, we lost 46 officers to retirement, and we lost 33 officers to resignations. Resignations meaning they more than likely went to another police force or got another job or decided to go down another path for their profession. So that's a total of 79 police officers that we lost in 2021. Now, thankfully, we had a class then, and we graduated 26 officers. So we had a net loss of 42 police officers in 2021. 2022, I'll go to next, second column. We have 35 retirements and 39 resignations. Total net loss of 74 police officers. Of course, we did not put a recruitment class on in 2021, so we will have no officers filling that gap. Now I move on to 2023, our current year. We have already lost 15 police officers. So of those 15, and keep this number in mind, this is a number I feel was the premise of everything here. The resignations are 12. And the retirements are 3. So the consensus is always, in the beginning of the year you'll get retirements because they want to end their career and they can start collecting their pension. The disturbing number here are the resignations. Mm-hmm. And as you can see in 2023, we're way out in front in resignations.
Mr. Chair, I don't mean to interrupt them. I think our numbers are a little different than yours, so
is that not right, Jason?
It's at 17 now, sir. We
17
lost 2 on
in the month of
Friday.
January. When did that happen, Jason?
2 on Friday.
2 on
one
Friday.
retirement and 1 more resignation.
So you can see it's almost, at least the first month of January, we're almost averaging 1 per day almost. So that's a startling number, and that's really what I want this conversation to focus on more than anything is how we're going to address these dwindling numbers. So we're at 17 for January.
17 is correct.
Thank you for that. So that's in the last 21 and 22, and starting 23. Now, what we did is we went back 6 years and we took an average of police officers that we lost every year for the past 6 years. And that number turns out to be 66. And I just use that as a figure for 2023 and 2024. We're obviously probably going to be losing more than 66, but I just thought that was a conservative, safe average that we can go by and just see where these numbers are going to look like in 2025. So in 2023, we guesstimated 66 we're going to lose, and we will not have a recruitment class in 2023 as well. In 2024, we're also going to lose an average of 66. This administration, thank you, put a recruitment class on, so we will be gaining 28 to kind of stop the bleeding there, is my thought. Now, in 2023, we budgeted 900 positions. Actual number of officers right now stands at 818. Now, of those 818, there are a number of, commanders, accommodated duty, long-term leave, military leave. So you could almost scratch off about 50 of those that really aren't going to be in the streets for us, okay? So that brings our number of working officers to 768 total that we feel at this time. For total projected losses for 2023 and 24, again, is 132. The new ones are going to be put on. The new class is going to be projected 28. So these numbers are real numbers, and I want everybody to know, I want my district, I want the public to know, as of 2025, the start of 2025, even with the new recruitment class that we have on, we're going to be at 669 police officers. That is, 250 less than what we're budgeted for, and it's close to 150 less than what we have now. So I want to get some answers to that. I want to ask the relevant questions that council might have, and I want to ask Lodge 1 what you think and where we can go as far as, writing this.
Mr. Chair, can I add one
Yes,
quick
sir.
number to that?
Yes, sir.
Only in that, at the height of the COPS program back in 93, 4, 5, we were looking at approximately 1,700 police officers serving. So when you look at a number like 700 and realize we're down 1,000 officers, I'm sorry. When you look at numbers like that from the mid-90s under the COPS program, which clearly was funded through the Clinton administration, a drastic cut of 1,000 officers over that period of time is a drastic number of
Right.
officers that have been
Sure,
cut. I just
sure.
wanted to sort of frame that part of the conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to sum that up, we lost since 2021 285 police officers, either retired or sought work elsewhere. We gained 54. That's including our future class, and we're going to have a net loss of 231 come 2025, and that's what gets us at the number of 669. So because of this drastic loss of numbers, it's a concern to me, and I think other council members and all the city, to be honest with you. The topics that I'm concerned about that I would like for you both to elaborate on, whether it be one or all of these topics. Okay, the issues of concern is first and foremost the current and future staffing levels, obviously, okay? What we can do to, keep that from dwindling to the 669 number by 2025. Police optimization and staffing study, the matrix study that we paid for. I'm looking to hopefully get some answers out of the administration as to what that says and, what their recommendations might be. Overtime expenses along with fatigue of officers. I want to address that problem. Obviously, the less officers we have, the more overtime we're going to have to pay. The morale and well-being of the police force. I'd like to know from Lodge 1 what the sentiments and the thoughts are of the police officers and how they are feeling at this stage. Police chief search, I'd like to, if you can elaborate on that, if you have anything for us on that, I would like to hear from, I'm sure council would like to hear about that. I made a trip down to the garage on 31st Street. I also serve on the Equipment Leasing and Authority Board, and our condition of our fleet is in dire straits at this point, and I think we need to find a creative way as to where we can get the amount of vehicles that we need so this police force can function. Regardless of the amount of number of our police force, whether it's 600 or 900, we're going to need these vehicles. Right now, it's all patchwork. And the collaboration with the county, what that might look like, in the future. I know the county executive came out with a statement this morning, and, I had spoken to him extensively about possible collaboration between the city and the county, specifically for patrolling downtown, I believe. But those are the subjects at hand. I hope we can keep it to these subjects as a council. And first and foremost, I'd like to thank you again for being here, and I will turn it over to the administration. And Jake, any which way, any order you want to go in is fine, but please, address any or all these issues for us.
Sure. Thank you, Councilman. Thank you, members, for joining, and thank you to the folks from FOP Lodge 1 for participating in this conversation today. I mean, I'll start where you started the conversation, Councilman, around staffing levels. I think that your point and the point Councilman Kraus made around the shifting number of officers in the complement is the right one, which is exactly why after 2 years where no classes had been initiated, that we made the decision last year to start a recruitment class and begin putting folks into the academy. As you pointed out in your analysis, the amount of time it takes to move folks through that process is lengthy, so we will see the fruits of that effort several years from now, or in 2024, rather than this year. But the only way to get back into a continuous rhythm of bringing folks on is to start with a new class, and so we're excited about that. We're particularly pleased by the early evidence that has come from the decision to eliminate the 60 college credit requirement to enter the academy. Director Schmidt can probably speak to this in greater detail than I can, but we've seen since that requirement changed, coming into this recruiting class, a larger number of folks signing up to be considered to take the test and be considered to enter the academy. We've also seen the group of people making that choice become more reflective of the city overall in terms of its diversity, both by race and gender. So, we're confident and optimistic about the class that is starting now, and committed to once this class is into the academy and the training process has started, beginning the process again of recruiting the next class on top of that, right? So, once we get this class of folks into the academy itself, we'll begin work right away on the next one in order to address that issue. Lisa, Lee, anything you want to add on staffing levels?
I was going to say, I can't add that, the changes we've made around recruitment, which we're continuing to add to initiatives as far as doing more recruiting efforts within the city, working with PPS and the Westinghouse CTE program to encourage younger folks to be interested in police, a pathway to get there. But even just the college credit portion, which when we visited the zones, many officers said they didn't feel that was key for entry into the department or into the bureau. They did think it's important as they go along that we can support that. But that alone has changed significantly in the past 2 groups of testing that our HR department has done. The number of people that have showed up for the tests has over doubled. We went from 15 to anywhere from 15 to 8 people showing up for classes to now in December there were 44 people that showed up for the class to take, or for the testing. The last test they had, there were 12 African American males, which is significant over what they normally see as 3 to 4 or 5. So we're happy that seems to be helping increase the recruitment levels, and many of those people are from within the city. So we do want folks, that know the city well to be part of the bureau.
I'll just throw in a couple of other quick things. You know, we've also been talking to people, officers, HR, about kind of where does that process sort of fall apart? I mean, you know, once you, because you're right, we can't have 100 people in a class, and so we want to have the fullest class we can, and we want as many people to make it through that class as possible, and we want as many young people to make it from when they put their hand up to say, hey, I think this is a good role for me maybe to make it into the class. So at all of the points where we can see drop off, we're, you know, taking initiatives to make sure that there's like all kinds of warm sort of hand holding, so that when you graduate from high school, you can't go straight into the academy because of the laws governing when you can carry a weapon, but we can see how you could time that out. So what is a role that young folks like that could have that would get them on their way? Could they become ambassadors, for instance? And what happens to people in the testing process, and what happens to people in the academy itself? So really working to make sure, given that every recruit is precious, that we don't lose anybody along the way.
Yeah, to elaborate on that point, you know, I think one of the major areas where we see drop off, to Lisa's point, is between taking the test and you know, scoring into what we call getting a packet, right? Be sort of being invited into the academy, to passing the necessary sort of pre-examinations. There's physical fitness requirements, reading comprehension requirements, things of that nature. That's often where folks who we've invited to join an academy class get stuck and then don't end up entering the academy on day one. You know, we've been working to establish mentorship relationships between this round of recruits and existing officers to help coach them through getting, you know, fit for the test, right? It obviously takes months of physical preparation to be ready to take the entrance test. And that's one example of many where officers who are currently serving can help these recruits be prepared so that we don't experience that same level of drop-off between the folks who are sent packets and those who enter the academy.
Right. And I'd like to point one thing out. I'm glad the classes are going well. We cannot put multiple classes on at once. We have only the capacity to put one class on at a time. When that class moves out of the schoolroom, we'll call it, whatever it might be, and into the field, then we could add another class.
We can. It's true that only one class of folks can be in the academy at a time, but that's why we're seeking to have that happening in an overlapping way, right? You know, there's a process to recruit and then, you know, test and ultimately qualify folks to enter the academy, and then there's a process they go through at the academy to become trained and certified. As I was saying earlier, once the city HR hands off a batch of recruits to the academy to be trained, they can begin the process of recruiting a subsequent class. Now, they have to do that also for fire classes and EMS classes as well, so there's no shortage of work to be done there, and we have to maintain sort of balance and rhythm to all of those efforts. But yes, only one group of folks can be moving through the academy at a time, but while one group of folks is moving through the academy, we can begin recruiting the next set of folks to go through the academy.
Okay, good deal. And the administration is committed to simultaneously putting on recruitment classes until we get to the level that we feel safe at.
Yes, I mean, you pointed out in your comments, Councilman, that we budget for 900 officers. Right. There's a reason that we budget for a full complement of officers, even when the actual number of folks on the rolls is less than that. It's so that we don't approve a budget that then restricts our ability to bring folks on over the course of that year. We budget at 900 so that we can continuously bring classes on until we reach the right level.
Okay, great. And then, rather than go down the list, I'd like to lodge one that, any comments you have on staffing levels and ideas that you might have, would you please? Mr. Swartzwelder.
Certainly, and Jason or Joe, feel free to jump in. So the current staffing levels of the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police, the best way to describe it is abysmal, because there's no strategy to determine how many officers that you want and what you want them to do. So when we determine how many officers and what mission is we want them to perform, do we want to target them to violent crime? Do we want to target them for social services? What is it that we exactly want the police to do? If the idea is violent crime, then you're going to organize around violent crime. If you're going to organize around social services, then you're going to organize around social services. The police are going to perform the mission that they're required to perform. And currently, right now, there is absolutely no way you can have a St. Patrick's Day parade, a marathon, or any other event in this city without improving your staffing levels, unless the city intends to violate the current collective bargaining agreement, which puts us in front of the labor board and in grievance arbitration regularly. I mean, my legal fees per year is $400,000 just to enforce this labor agreement that the city signs off on. So, and the reason we do that is because the city, and I don't mean the people sitting at this table, but the people at this table put in charge currently violate the labor agreement regularly. I've been in front of the labor board at least 14 or 15 times just to do basic things that's inside this contract. And that's not just this that's not just this mayoral administration, it's also the previous one. So constantly, we don't have the adequate staffing to perform the mission. If our mission is to staff the marathon, if our mission is to staff the St. Patrick's Day Parade, if our mission is to staff Picklesburg and these other really nice events and the Arts Festival and all that kind of stuff, then just say that. Tell the city of Pittsburgh residents, our mission is not to answer calls or stop violent crime in your neighborhood. Our mission is to have these nice events for you, because you can't do both with the staffing that you have. It's really nice that the chief executive of the county, Mr. Fitzgerald, wants to bring in the county police. I'll be forced to file an unfair labor practice on that, because that's subcontracting bargaining unit work, and the only reason that would occur is because the city refuses to staff adequately. So your current staffing levels are in trouble. I had Jason run the numbers. He could feel free to jump in. We have 160 of the 242 that can retire today have over 25 years on the job. So if you look at our pension data from the pension office, typically a police officer enters service at age 28, they stay 25 years and they retire at age 53. We already have 160 that already meet that requirement. So now you're aging out and you're not getting from the bottom, and the overwhelming majority of your resignations are from the bottom. So you have no experience to roll over into these supervisory positions and things of that nature. So that's our basic premise. I could go on for 3 hours, but the meeting is not to be that long. So that's on current and future staffing levels. The matrix study, we were studied in 2004. The city completely ignored it. That was the International Association of Chiefs of Police study. It was a 5-volume study paid for by the ICA. I believe Mr. Krause was still here, was on council at that time. And I think you might be the only one that was here then. Burgess. In 2000, oh yeah, Reverend Burgess, right. And we were studied then, and it was ignored. Not by him or by Reverend Burgess, but by the police administration. So it'll be interesting to see what they do when the matrix study comes in, if they're going to follow it and pay attention to it. So I'm going to speak frankly. So if I get too
That's
out
what
of
we're
hand
here for.
and council wants to throw me out, I mean, I'll be happy, and we'll let
We
Joe
may,
take
we'll
over,
see.
but-
We'll see how you behave.
But, I'm going to speak. Overtime expenses, it's not just the money, because actually overtime's cheaper for the city. Because when you hire a new officer, as you well know, you have pension costs, you have health care costs, and so on. But what you have is the hidden cost, and that is you're working the officers to the bone. They are just exhausted. And when you have an officer that's exhausted, they're going to make bad decisions, and it's going to get the officer hurt. It could get a citizen injured, and so on and so forth. So you need to be very careful, because these officers are worked to the bone. And they're not getting any relief. When an officer leaves for work every day, here's what they tell their significant other: I don't know if I'll be home. Not because they might be killed, but because when they're allowed to go home by their supervision, because they're so understaffed, they just continuously hold over. They continuously hold over. And you could call anybody in here you like. You could call the chief of police in here, you could call any lieutenant or any sergeant, and I would debate that issue with them if anything I say here is incorrect. As far as officer morale and well-being, that's why it's in the tank. Because the officers do not know when they're going to go home. Every officer wants to serve the city of Pittsburgh. That's why they join to be a police officer. That's why I joined this force over 30 years ago. You know, I did it because I want to serve where I live. I'm born and raised here on the north side. If any of you know me, I still live there. I still reside there in the city. And I want to serve my citizens, and I love serving the city of Pittsburgh residents. However, having said that, you have a lot of police officers that don't work under the same conditions. I'm an instructor by my primary trade. I'm no longer in the field. Joe still is in the field. So my job's a little easier than his job, okay, to continuously, work that call volume. Most of our police officers, our 400 and some patrol officers, it's probably lower than that, it's probably in the 300s, are getting crushed. They have no idea when they're going to go home to their families every day because they're just not released for work. Some officers are doubling back 2, 3, 4 shifts. I've heard Councilman Krause speak about it on the south side over there with all the problems they're having there. Those officers are constantly held over. As far as the police chief search, we have a police chief. We need to support that current chief. You want to go search, hey, have at it. But we have a police chief right now that needs supported. He needs to have staffing, and that's what we need to be doing for that particular chief. We don't have an issue with the chief, Stan Grecki. We have an issue with not having police on the job. That's the issue that the FOP has. We need police officers on the job. And if you hire a new police chief, that's great. What assets are you going to give him or her? You don't have any assets now. So then you think they're going to be a messiah, and then you're going to be able to break police fish in half, and then you're going to get 10,000 more fish? You're not going to get 10,000 more fish. You only have as many fish as you put on the streets. Condition of the fleet and officer equipment, because I'm sticking to your agenda here, Mr. Cargill. The condition of the fleet and officer equipment, if you talk to Sergeant McDaniels down there, he may be uncomfortable sitting at this table, but I'm not. It's abysmal. They're stealing parts from cars to put in other police cars because they're tasked out over 100,000 miles and so on. So he's doing the best he can, him and Steve Grisani, to pull parts out of one car and put it in another car. And we have a fleet management group, and we're supposed to be funding that. I don't know where that comes from. And as far as city and county collaboration, I'll leave that to all of you.
Okay, well, thank you. And before I move back to the administration, since you ran down the whole line of that, that's great. Because if you would go expedient as Mr. Schwartzwater will be great, and then we'll open it up to council, and I'm sure a lot of these questions will come out. I'm sorry, Mr. Krause, did you want to add something? Okay, okay, good. So Jason, will you guys want to add anything to that?
I would just say the biggest thing I get from the younger officers we have is that they don't see any hope on the horizon. Mm-hmm. So they've come here, they're working the 6 zones in the city doing patrol, and like Bob said, lots of times they don't know if they're going to be home. If somebody calls off sick, then they're going to have to stay. And I think that's the biggest reason for the exodus with the resignations. Mm-hmm. They don't have any idea of what's going to be down the road, if it's going to get any better. They haven't seen anything in 3 or 4 years to make them think that it's going to get better for them. And I talked the other day at Zone 2, there was 3 or 4 of them in the substation, and I said, just off the top of your head that you know of, how many younger guys are in the testing process? And they told me 8, after they thought about it for a couple minutes, and they gave me names. And then, so that's just another 8 that are actively testing in the suburbs, the boroughs, and now they're even going farther. We had 2 go to Erie in December. So these kids, the younger ones, they need to see something happen that gives them a reason to stay, because they don't see it right now,
right,
in my opinion.
Thanks, Jason. And the Nicholas family I grew up with, I tell you, they didn't need guns, they didn't need anything, and nobody messed with the Nicholas family in Brookline. So, Joey, do you want to add anything to that?
No, just to jump on Jason. Police officer hiring throughout the country is a problem. Sure. The only place that it's not a problem is right here in Allegheny County, because they have a farm team, and that would be us. Right. So they are plucking us clean. They're offering a lot better benefits, better pay, and they're not going to be held overtime constantly. We just got a list of 12 events, 10 or 12 events that will be happening this year that officers have already been told that their past days will be canceled, that they will not be allowed to have off during these events because we're understaffed, and we can't staff those events without making everybody give up their off days. So that already has the guys screaming. When the email came out, the young guys just went absolutely crazy about it. So no one else in the county has our problem, because they pluck us. And until we run out of people for them to pluck, they'll be healthy, right, and we will not be.
Right.
So.
I will say I visited Zone 6, Zone 3, and the morale of the men and women there was really good. They're not deterred by, such numbers. I know behind the scenes maybe they say things and are, but just as my presence was there, they couldn't have been nicer, couldn't have been more supportive. So it's just a kudos to our department and the men and women who serve there. They go there every day knowing they have a job to do. So the administration, I know you left off with the staffing level. We don't have to go back over that, and the questions will arise from council with that. But if you want to go down the list and brief comments or comments on any of that, please.
Sure. So as it relates to the police optimization and staffing study, the matrix study, I think we expect to have results from that in the very near future. The publication was slightly delayed simply because we had to pull some additional information for them to help them complete their analysis, and that took a little longer than anticipated. But it's on schedule at this point. But we don't have a final study at this point. We have seen some early indications of the work that they're doing that I think Director Schmidt can talk about. But I would just note, because it was raised earlier, we are fully committed to utilizing the recommendations of the study in shaping further proposals that we can then bring back to council and discuss, with the public, council, the union, and others, on how to implement them to ensure that we've got a force that is able to respond to the demands of the moment. I will say one of the very exciting results that we've seen in the early indications from the study, which I think the men and women of the Bureau should be very proud of, is that Pittsburgh stands head and shoulders above virtually anyone in terms of our response time and in terms of the level of service we provide our residents. We are much quicker to answer calls than most other similarly positioned places, even in the context of some of the challenges that have been mentioned about 2 lost years in terms of recruiting classes, the relationship to suburban forces around us who often hire our officers. I mean, those are, I acknowledge and agree with the comments that were previously made about the challenges they present to us, but even in the face of that, we respond better on patrol than virtually anyone you can stack us up against. And I think I certainly take pride in that. I think the police should take pride in that. But the full results of the study, including assessment of those kinds of service levels, as well as the ways in which we utilize our resources to respond to investigations, right? We've been talking today mostly about the operations branch, right? Patrol on the streets, responding to calls. Obviously, a huge portion of the Bureau is focused on criminal investigations. There will be recommendations around that, and the ways in which we use officers for administrative functions. A large portion of the force is serving in a capacity related to administrative duties, evidence room warrants, things of that nature. So we'll have a comprehensive picture from them about all of that will inform our decision making. Lee, do you want to add anything on the study?
No, I think the study will show us, as Mr. Pollock stated, our officers do a great job every day. And despite the challenges that have come to them over the past 3 years, come to all the public safety, they have stepped up. They continue to maintain the highest level of service. They continue to do great work, and is very appreciated. I think the study will show that, similar to what Bob had mentioned, part of what is a big challenge for us are the special events. We are not a large city nationally, but in our state, in our region, we're a huge city, right? And we have 3 major sports teams in this city that require extra policing. We have a lot of events that people want to have in this city. And I think we have to have some, as the study progresses, it'll talk more about that. But we have to have some decisions and some discussions with these event organizers about, you can't take police off the street to maintain an event. We have to make decisions about what those events look like and how we can safely allow those events to happen, but without pulling people off the street and overworking our officers. Right now, all those events end up getting covered, whether it's football games, baseball games, or whatever, get covered with overtime. And that's great when an officer wants to make money, but when they want some time off, they need to be able to have that too. So I think this study will help with that. And like I said, our officers do a great job every day. It's the random extra things that sometimes get thrown into the mix that cause a lot of issues. So
Lee mentioned overtime. I mean, again, I think we're largely in agreement with folks in the FOP, as they said that overtime, the amount of overtime we're asking officers to do is a problem. It's born of the staffing levels as they exist right now for all the reasons we've already mentioned. I agree that it's overtaxing on them, and something that we are keenly aware of and seeking to address for the next bullet on the list, which is officer well-being. It's the burden of that additional time to maintain our staffing levels falls disproportionately on younger officers, because when when not enough folks are signing up to take an overtime shift for any given reason, it's the folks with the least seniority who have to step in. So, we would like to address the ways in which we utilize overtime. That's part of what the matrix study will help us do. That's part of what bringing classes on to increase the number of officers will do. In both instances, those processes take time, but we're pursuing them as quickly as we can. On the question of the chief search, I'll turn it over to Chief Frank to give a quick update there.
Okay, I'll do that. Then maybe we might want to go back to the morale and well-being just a little bit, because I think there are some other things that we're trying to think about there. So the chief search, I think we're coming to a conclusion. I'll start by saying that we also, agree with Bob and others about Chief Stan Grecki and wanting to support him and working with him. The search is really because we had a resignation and we need to have a search. So I think people know that we we did a bunch of public meetings in various communities because we wanted to hear first from our residents about what they wanted to see, and those were really interesting. Turns out our residents have lots of thinking about officers, lots of memories about officers, lots of hopes about officers, and we sort of pulled all of that together at the same time that we recruited a search committee and a search firm. So the job of the firm is to listen to our residents and listen to all of you. I think you got some phone calls from the firm to hear what you're interested in, and then try to match that with who they know is in here or out there looking for a job, to sort of pull together a pile of resumes that are responsive to what our community has said it wants in a chief. So they'll pull those resumes together. They'll get an additional level of screening from our search committee, which is a pretty diverse group of people. Chief Holmes is on it. I think people remember him, knows the Bureau, knows policing. We've got a business person on there. We've got somebody from the foundation community. We've got somebody from the county, people who interact with our officers and have some insight into that. And they'll talk about those resumes, maybe whittle it down, or so on and so forth. And then ultimately, the decision is the mayor's. So I think we're coming in for a landing in the not too distant future. Our I don't know what to call it. Our almost like advertisement. What's it called? A brochure? I don't know if people saw it, but when we sort of put up and said, hey, here's Pittsburgh, we're looking for a chief. And we talked a little bit about ourselves. We talked about the findings from our community. We described the Bureau and some of its challenges, which sounded a little bit like what you all described. And I think, we're hoping to wrap that up in the next couple of months.
Great. You wanted to touch on morale?
Well, I just wanted to mention some things. I mean, it was really, Bob's who I sort of said at the beginning that, what are our police supposed to be doing? And we talked a little bit about special events. I think, and then you said, well, should they be doing social services or should they be doing, I think we want our police to be doing policing. And so we're really trying to look through the matrix study and just by talking to y'all and talking to other people about things police do that are not policing that would help to lighten police's load a little bit, help them focus on what it is that they signed up to do and get off their plate things that they didn't sign up to do that just contribute to the workload and so on. So, just a few that I think you've probably heard a little bit about. We'd like for our officers not to have to chase false alarms, and the research that we have shows that 97% of people's automatic alarms are really not anything's going on there. So how would that help our police to spend a little less time chasing stuff they ought not to be chasing if we could have instead verified response? Our officers, traffic calls, do we need a sworn officer for that? Is there a way that we can move that, continue to have, that stuff done but not done by officers? Could we do more telephone reporting for things that are not really so serious? My bicycle's gone, or things like that. And then, in terms of social calls, absolutely not. The whole point of co-response and the Roots program and so on is to have a place so officers can say, this is not really about criminal investigation. It's not really about public safety per se. Let's hand that off to somebody who can do that mental health response. And so the officers that we've talked to and some of the data that we've seen, if you're an officer, as many as a third of the calls that you're going out on are mental health calls or something like that. So let's right size all of that, which we think will help with the staffing to some extent, and we think, we hope will help with morale and well-being, because nobody wants to be running around doing things they don't want to do.
And quickly, if you can just follow up on the fleet, and then we'll get to council for questions.
Sure. On the fleet, the city across the board has challenges with our fleet. It's a legacy of the period of time we spent under Act 47 and in financial distress. It's a long-term capital asset, and when we're not investing in it, it ages and deteriorates, and it takes a lot longer to get it caught back up to high performance than it takes for things to start going poorly, right? And so I think we acknowledge that across the board, in police, in fire, in EMS, and DPW, everywhere that we have a large number of vehicles, there are challenges. Specifically as it relates to the fleet for the Bureau of Police, we've endeavored to stretch the resources we can make available to that as far as we can in terms of purchasing new vehicles. We're working right now, Councilman, as you mentioned, and as an ELA board member, you've rightly raised this issue to identify additional funds we can make available within this year's ELA allocation to increase the number. I think I heard today we had identified $500,000 more since we last spoke last week, so that's 7 or 8 further vehicles likely that we'll be able to order this year. I'm hopeful that we can continue to find additional resources to make that number grow, but we want to replace as much of the fleet as we can in the context of replacing all of the fleets, right? Because we have similar challenges in fire and elsewhere. But it is an important priority, and I don't think anyone would disagree that more investment would help. The last thing here on your list is city-county collaboration. The Allegheny County Police, the Sheriff's Department, and other agencies have overlapping jurisdiction with us in city limits, so they can certainly patrol those areas if they choose to. We ask, and I think we have a commitment from them to ensure that that's coordinated through Director Schmidt and our Department of Public Safety to the extent they make those changes. But regardless of that question, we are committed. That came up in the context of downtown, and we're presently working to increase the number of officers and the visibility of officers downtown to address concerns that are coming from the businesses and residents and employees who work downtown. We'll be able to say more about that in the near future, but it is something that we've prioritized and something that we're working towards. There is presently a substation downtown that I think was addressed earlier that our police are currently using, and we're in the process of thinking about the future of that and ensuring there's a strong presence for the police downtown to patrol what is to Lee's point, the central sort of hub of our entire region, right? The city of Pittsburgh is the host of our downtown, but it is the downtown of the entire southwestern Pennsylvania region. So a lot of folks come through there, and that comes with certain needs, and so we're attuned to that, and ourselves, and in the ways we're staffing, as well as ensuring that to the extent others are sharing that space, that we're working together.
Good enough. Before I turn it over to council, I want to say 2 things. Number one, I met with both groups here multiple times. At the end of our meeting, I feel like I have something I feel like you all can agree on in order to address these devastating numbers, really. It's really the population of our police force. It's my most pressing issue at this table, and we'll go through other concerns as you all bring them up. But I do have a couple suggestions. I hope we can leave this room, not just to bicker about who's right and who's wrong and what's the right size force and what's not, but I hope to leave here with a consensus between Lodge 1 and the administration as to at least sit down at the table and talk about other things. We're at arbitration now, so we're not talking about pay raises or anything of that nature at this point, but there are many other ways that we can cooperate, and I feel we can continue talks without waiting for an arbitrator to come back with his or her decision. So with that, I will thank council members for joining, and I've got to start with our Madam President here. Floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for the work that you do. I just want to say before we begin, I appreciate that you pulled this all together and that you were trying so hard to work with everyone. I think you do a great job when you're leading something. I think you do a really good job.
Thank
So
you. With your help, of course.
So thank you for your work. But I also want to say that you're some of the nicest people I've ever worked with. So I want to say that. But I also want to say I think Mayor Gainey is very nice, but I think he's getting a little bit of a bad hit over this. I think people are tired of the crime in the city of Pittsburgh. They're tired of what's happening downtown. They want to see him respond and react, and so I just want to say, I think sometimes he may feel one way, but it's difficult when you don't have the staffing to put in different places. But with that said, there's a couple of questions I have, and I want to be clear. I've heard this over and over and over again, that it came in for two things. One, to do what the activists want, was to defund the police, and two, what SEIU wants is to sue UPMC. Those are the two things I hear repeatedly throughout the community. So I want to just give you a chance to address that, because I think that somebody should address it publicly, because it's been something that we've heard time and time again. And so I don't know if you feel comfortable, if one of you feel comfortable addressing that, or any of you.
We've not done either of those things.
I know.
We've not decreased police funding. Obviously, the administration has now proposed and passed a budget that did not include a reduction in police funding. In fact, it spends more than the prior year, I believe. But that's not something that we've implemented, nor is it something we ever intended. And I think the mayor's been very clear about that. As mayor and as a candidate for mayor, there are folks who had that assumption, and I've heard them say it too, but that's not been our approach. I think the efforts we've undertaken are ones to improve staffing levels and improve the conditions under which our officers work. One of the first things that the mayor did upon taking office, with many of us with him, is visit each police zone to hear from the officers who are working there about the challenges they face, and other police units, in order to learn from them what they see as solutions to some of the challenges the Bureau faces. It was as a result of those conversations, for instance, that we made the decision to eliminate the 60 college credit rule, because it was something we heard routinely or consistently from officers they believe would improve recruitment. Now, of course, as in any group of people that have over 800 members, they didn't all agree, but that was a clear through line from those conversations. So we made that change, and then we took steps to bring on a class. We found that by having made that change, more folks are signing up to take the test, and that will help us bring on the largest classes we can, and the most reflective of the city classes that we can. I think that those are important investments in the police, rather than what you're saying folks have said or are saying. So,
well, I know, let me just say this. I know you know the conversations, because we've had the conversations about these things that people, what the community is saying. And so I think it's important for them to hear firsthand what your thoughts are. But I think part of the thought process is that you're allowing the police department to sort of fall in disarray is your way of defunding them as well. So and I think that right now we do see the police department struggling with numbers, and as I've heard you say, I was listening to the meeting in the back, I heard you mention that we could get as low as 600 and some. And so it's concerning. But I just want to say that I think that those are things that you need to address for the public and for our own knowledge, because that's something I'm not going to be supportive of. I already talked to our law department, our solicitor, to see what we can do as a council that we can do differently, because I feel like we have to do something, because it is so bad. And I do think that these curfew centers that we're talking, or not curfew centers, the resource centers that we're talking about may have some solution to some of the crime in the city of Pittsburgh. But I think that there's a bigger picture here, and I think that conversation is going to take shape, and we'll know what direction we need to go and things we need to add. But also, I want to say, I know you're not talking, or you are, when we talk about the funding, you do have some of the funding increasing, including for the chief of police, as I mentioned to you. And do you mind if I bring this up? I mentioned to you privately that I noticed that the consultant has the chief of police position posted for about $30,000 or $40,000 more than what it actually is in the budget. And so you talked about that being a way to recruit people, and hopefully you get some qualified candidates and that sort of thing. And that's something that if in fact somebody's hired with that amount, it will come back to council for approval, and it's pending approval, and that person will know that in advance.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. We wouldn't,
Someone
we
say that.
can't hire someone for a salary more than what council has authorized. So any final offer at a higher salary we'd have to come back to you to discuss. Upon the advice of the search firm, which does this for cities all across the country, and based on what they know about who's out there.
Can you give us a chance? Can you give us a example of some of the cities they have helped? Offhand, do you
I
know?
don't know it offhand, but
Okay.
we can get that for you. yeah.
Okay.
Um,
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
Oh,
Just on their advice, they suggested that we should post it with a higher salary range, and that could be part of the discussion as we look at candidates who respond to the posting. But yes, the salary is not changed until we collectively decide that it's changed.
Okay. And then, so I just want to make sure I mentioned that part. I do think that you've, lessened the requirements and dropped the educational requirements to attract more police. And I'm not opposed, but what I think is that somebody just pointed out to me, actually it was Solicitor Friesen, that in Sweden they do take kids with high school as soon as they're old enough to have a gun or whatever. That they do take them, but then they move towards getting their degrees. That if they something they can have in 2 years, something they can have in 4 years. If they want to be a detective, it has to be 4 years. So I don't know. I just think maybe have a conversation with him and look into that a little bit, because that would be an interesting way to do it too. But I do want to say I know that Channel 11.
We are doing that, Councilwoman.
Are you?
Just so you know.
Oh, good. Do you want to say that?
Yeah.
Do you want to talk?
Sure. Sorry. Yeah, our intent is more along the line, and this is something we heard too.
Okay.
So having 60 college credits in itself doesn't necessarily apply to a job as a police officer, right? You can have those 60 credits in anything. So our intent behind this is to eliminate the 60 credits for entry, but then do programs like the tuition reimbursement, work with the union on ways we can provide extra benefits, educational benefits, to have them take classes that are pertain to the job. So they're focused on the career and not just on getting in the door and getting 60 credits in whatever degree it might be that has very little or no relevance on policing. So we are talking and working with some local universities to see if they can do some bridge programs or even potentially give some credits for our academy at some universities, that they waive some credits or give them default credits because they've completed our academy, which is one of the longest and most stringent in the state. So I think they deserve that.
Experience on that.
Yeah, so myself as a paramedic, I went to Point Park University twice, but the second time, because I was a paramedic certified in the state of Pennsylvania, they gave me 60 credits for my certification. That didn't require me going to college. I went to, a trade program to become a paramedic. We want to do something similar for our officers. So that's kind of our goals with that, is to encourage them and give them benefits of going through policing and getting those credits in a related field, not just any random thing.
And to your final point about that, Councilwoman, we would require folks to complete something like that in order to be considered for promotion. So, for example, we're saying you don't need 60 credits to come in the door to the academy. You would need something like that, to be considered for sergeant, right? So that basically you could earn those credits in your time with us before advancing to the next step.
Okay, and then I just briefly, I did say Channel 11 did some kind of story about response times being slowed, that there was 7-something minutes or something. So I don't know. I heard you say their response times are good, but are they slower than they had been? Are they? I mean, tell me what you were referring to.
The early indications we've seen from the Matrix study is that if you compare our response times to other peer cities nationally, or even larger cities than us, larger forces than ours, we perform very well. We perform better than others. I'm not familiar with the particular report, the media report that you're referring to, so I'd have to check that. But
Yeah, it was something on Channel 11. I honestly don't remember the exact story, but it was something about the response times. I remember seeing it. As soon as you said something, they said something about it. And then my conversations with the county exec was that he initially thought that he would have to have permission from the city to come in. And you're saying that he does not need permission. Is that what you're saying?
No, so we would, as Bob mentioned, we would have to work with the union if they're going to come in and patrol all the time. They do have some jurisdiction because they are within the
Yeah.
county.
I don't think they would do
but
the whole
two
city. I think they would do
departments-
certain areas, yeah.
The two departments, or our bureau would have to work with the sheriff's office, and which they do now for special events. But the union would have to be involved, as Bob mentioned. The union has a right to negotiate with us on some of that stuff. So
Do you want to respond?
I would like to, if you don't mind.
Please.
So, the county police, they do have concurrent jurisdiction, but there's a concept in the law called the Municipal Police Jurisdiction Act.
Yeah, that's what he
where we have
said.
primary jurisdiction.
Yeah, that's
So-
what he said.
And we are the ones, the city of Pittsburgh is the ones that politically indemnify the police officers' actions within the jurisdiction of the city of police. So if you're gonna do some collaboration, you need to make sure you document in your agreement with the county or whatever other group that the administration decides to bring in here in police. You better talk to Beth Pittenger from the Citizens Police Review Board, because she has no jurisdiction over their conduct otherwise. You better talk to OMI, Aaron Bruni, because whenever there's complaints filed, then who are they going to file that complaint to? Because if a county police officer or county sheriff, and I'm not saying that they would do this, but they would engage in misconduct, but if they would, where are they going to report it? And if there's a city police officer there, I know from the FOP side, we're going to say, hey, if a county cop or a county sheriff puts their hands on somebody, they own that arrest. Because we weren't there, we didn't witness why they got involved in that incident, and you're going to start having those types of problems. So be aware of the doctrine of unintended consequences. Be careful that you don't engage in strategic narcissism, that you want things to be a way that you believe they should be rather than what they really are. So one needs to be very careful when they start bringing in these outside entities. And I know Bruce Krause is big on this because I've heard him speak at the table about it, about accountability, right? So if we're gonna take on that responsibility, I'm not just speaking as a citizen and a taxpayer in Mr. Wilson's district, because I'll call his office, in a minute as a citizen.
Thank you for living on the north side.
What's that? I will call and complain. Okay. But my point is that if we're going to bring them in, we better understand what it is we're doing. That's all I'm saying. Is that if we're going to take on that outside police entity, how do you control it?
So that's what I just want to be clear. It's not as simple as, yes, he can send him in, no, he can't send him in. There's a lot to consider. So I just want to be very clear about that.
And if I was unclear about that, Councilman, I apologize. But yes, we agree with what Bob just said. And I think, again, our intention is to, working with the command staff, ensure that our police response to the situation downtown, conditions downtown are appropriate and, meet the needs of the moment. So that's our primary focus, is working with our own police bureau to ensure that we're responding to conditions as they change.
I just want to be clear. I think, we all see policing different, and I'm going to stop because I know my colleagues want to ask a lot of questions. But I think we all see policing differently, and I think but we all share that we want the city of Pittsburgh to be safe. And I think how we get there is how the conversation that we're going to have. But I do think that they have a difficult job, and I do think morale is low. I think it's low because of just the entire climate across the country, and I actually think it's starting to have some backlash, and some people are starting to get shy away from saying defund the police and those kinds of things because it is having such an effect. But I think people are also becoming wiser to the whole process, everything that's going on, and so it's difficult. It's a difficult situation. It's a difficult time right now, and I thank you for being police officers in this environment. I know it's challenging, and for your dangerous work. So with that said, and thank you all I would never want to be on the mayor's side having to negotiate a contract, because if I would be like Oprah Winfrey, and you get a car, and you get a car, and I'd give everything in the way, and the city would be broke. So let me just say that I'm glad it's not me.
Madam President?
That's it. Thank you very
Thank you
much,
very much.
Councilman.
I just want to make sure there's no time constraints with any other members, but we could just go down the line and go to Councilman Kraus.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you very much. And thank you all for being here to engage in a really complex, complicated, but important discussion. I would like to start my comments by saying that I don't think this is a one and done. This is not something that we can just discuss today and say we've done our job and walk away from it. I think I know this is going to have to be an ongoing conversation that's going to take place regularly. The problem is such, as I see it, that I don't want to overcharacterize it by saying things like state of emergency, but we're at a dangerous time here when governments are assembled for this simple reasons, pick up the garbage, sweep the streets, and provide for the public safety, right? I mean, it's the role that government takes. It's why we are formed, and ensuring that we have not just an adequate bureau, but that the bureau has everything that it needs. It has the resource it needs. It has the personnel it needs. And it has the training that it needs. It has the equipment that it needs to provide for the function that we ask them to do. And I'm very proud of this council for the time that I've served. We have always strived to be a friend to our Bureau of Public Safety and understand the difficulties and the complexities, and to provide for a resource that was within our power, whether that be body cameras, the different, what are we in the fourth iteration now of body cameras now? Council has always supported that kind of technology. I served a number of years on the ELA. We made great advancements in the kinds of vehicles that we provided for police officers, and the numbers of officers. Am I saying we were perfect? No, not by any means. But we did, providing tough books for officers, making each car an individual police station, if you will, not being so invested in brick and mortar. This idea that if we just had a station everywhere, the world would be okay. It isn't. We want police to be equipped, each vehicle to be able to perform the function it needs to perform while you're out there and provide for your safety. We have done that. Actually, that was, when I came to council, that was something that we were supposed to do. And then somehow the world fell apart a few years ago. And all of a sudden it became this horrible thing to be a police officer. And I don't believe that. I'm just saying that, that's the message that's out there now. And that somehow police officers have become the enemy. And I can't think of anything that is further from the truth. When, after the murder of George Floyd, and the international conversation of what policing should look like, we spent about 18 weeks working directly with Black American leadership in the Hilltop neighborhoods that I represent, and we invited multiple people across the spectrum to talk about what policing should look like. And what we learned is that policing should not be policing, but rather it should be the call to protect and serve, and that there was a real clear definition of how people do not want to be lorded over. People do not want to feel that somehow someone is exercising undue power over them, but rather that we, as we say, we're here to protect and serve. And that was a real eye-opener for me to understand the difference between that, and to see that people were really advocating for that. So, through this conversation, the international conversation, since the murder of George Floyd, there just are places where I believe we've just gone off the rails. I don't, I say this all the time, I'm existing in a world that I just fail to understand anymore, any longer. And it scares me that we are, as a society, creating this environment where there's a real desire for people not to enter this as a profession. And that's, I think, is the most dangerous pariah we face right now is how do we change that national discussion of that it is honorable and respectful and contributing in nature to seek law enforcement as a profession, and that we as governmental bodies will support that and provide for your your health and safety, well-being, your adequate training, which I argue for here all the time. You and I have had that conversation so many times, but that's the holistic picture. And I'm worried that in the world in which we find ourselves now, that we've lost sight of that. And I truly don't know how we get that back. How do we make Pittsburgh be the city that if you want to go into law enforcement, you want to come to Pittsburgh to be in law enforcement, that we make it that inviting, that enticing that you want to be here. And as we all know this, we're going to talk openly and honestly here, that's not where we are right here and now. And it's no one's individual fault. It's a collective thing that's been going on through a number of administrations and I would argue again just society in general and the view somehow that's been allowed to permeate the national discourse that somehow this is a dishonorable profession when it is anything but. That's the big challenge. I would love to know. My first question, that's an introduction to our first question, but how do you change the hearts and minds? How do you?
I'd like to respond to that, Mr. Crown.
Yeah.
First and foremost, you address the incident. So whatever that incident is that caused this, when you talk about the Floyd incident, you address the Floyd incident. So you investigate that incident and that incident only, and then whenever we deal with that incident, that's how you address it. And if you decide you're going to bring charges against that particular officer or that group, or you have an agency issue, but we don't spread it around. I was asked recently, following the discussion with the city and about our contract on Marty Griffin, I was asked that very question about the judiciary, and they were talking about the judiciary and about the prosecutors and the revolving door and the death of Chief McIntyre. And I believe it was Larry Richard tried to pull me in, which is his job as a reporter. And he asked me, he said, well, what do we do about this revolving door of justice when this guy, and I said, let me stop you right there. I said, let's investigate that incident. Let's talk about that particular incident with that particular judge or that particular prosecutor or that particular parole and probation or whatever, and not paint all the probation and parole, all the judiciary, and the entire prosecutorial system, and we're going to blow it up. And what I think happens in policing, and this is you asked me what my opinion is, I'm going to give it to you because I've done tons of use of force expert witness work. If we just address those incidents, then if there is a bleed over into another agency, then we address that. But first and foremost, address the incident first, that particular agency, those particular groups of officers. That's my opinion.
So just to respond to one thing you said, this is too important a conversation to be having on Marty Griffin, and I'll just leave that hang in the air. How does one recreate the I don't want to say the image, but the honor of the profession that one, we'll always have to recruit, I understand that, but we will have people, God willing, one day lined up that this is really the job we want. It comes down to clearly pay. It clearly comes down, we've had this discussion from the day I walked in the door. It comes down to overtime. It comes down to not having clear definition of what the police role is and what they should be doing, what they should not be doing. Are they supposed to be event organizers and so forth and so on, and all those kinds of things? But how do we solely as the city of Pittsburgh recreate the honor of the profession? I hate that. We recreate the honor of the profession that we become a desirable department again for people to want to be a part of. I mean, that's a big question. I get it.
I mean, I think Lisa spoke to this earlier and can probably continue that thought. But I think part of the solution, as you're sort of mentioning, as she mentioned earlier, and as Officer Schwartzwelder mentioned earlier on, is adding some clarity around expectation, right? I think part of the national discourse that you're talking about has made it somewhat unclear to folks who are considering a profession in the police what the job really is. And I think we have as an administration, have a clear picture of that, and I think it's one that the union shares and the council shares and the public shares, but we need to sort of communicate that clearly, which is that the job is to first and foremost, prevent violent crime or investigate violent crime when it happens, right? That it is about being the protector and the servant, to use the words you mentioned, that excites people about the job, as opposed to other duties that we've sort of over decades kind of piled onto the policing profession. At least anything to that.
And I think you've named a lot of it. I would say I don't think it is one thing. I think some of it is providing support to the bureau and I was in the administration. We use the word right a lot. The force should be the right size. It should be doing the right job. It should be in the right relationship with the community. It should be in the right relationship, and each of those pieces is a little bit separate. You got to work on them, and you got to work on them all together. Because I think if you miss any of them, then you can't do this. I don't know what you want to call it. It starts with whatever this word is, right? But I also say that, when we're out in the community, I think there's a lot more variation in people's thinking than maybe the picture that you just painted. I mean, we've been in community meetings where we say to people, we are going to make it so that you get your education while you're in the academy and on the job, rather than have to take a student loan to try to come in. And people cheer. I think what Lee was pointing to, I think we have 60 folks have put themselves on the list since that very, very simple move to say, you're welcome, even if you're not somebody who can acquire those credits. When we go and we talk to communities about what their difficulties are, I don't want to say that there are not people who are concerned about the relationship between police and community, and maybe even fearful that relationship could be, not always the best one. But equally, there are people who, speak, lovingly about the commander or and want to be sure that they get the support, or want to be sure that there is sufficient patrol to deal with the issues that they are dealing with, issues of violent crime. So I think there's a lot to work with. I think people have put most of the right ideas on the table, and I think some of it is just a question of rolling up our sleeves and getting it done.
If I could respond to that, please. To your question, that's the magic question. And I would tell you, I don't think anybody really has an answer here as to how we're going to make society view being a police officer as a honorable thing that used to be and still is to me, I will say. And to that point, my brother's a police chief, my cousin's a police chief in surrounding communities, and I know all the police chiefs, okay? I know for a fact their recruiting levels are way down. So we become, as Officer Nicholas said, a farm club. Cannonsburg used to have 50 reply every year. Now they have 8.
We've had that conversation from the day I
Right.
walked in the store. 15 years.
Monroeville used to get 200 apply. They have like 30. So they don't have anybody to pick from. What do? It's easy for them to turn to the Pittsburgh police and say, we'll pay you an extra $30,000 a year. And can anybody blame our officers for leaving for their own well-being? So I just wanted to add that. So I'm sorry, I didn't want to.
No. You take the conversation where I'd like to go.
Okay.
That much of what we've talked about here is recruitment, and how do we get new officers in that are willing to accept a position and help us beef our numbers. But we haven't talked yet about officers that have given 30 years of their lives already, and what we should be doing to better their lives and their working conditions, and to honor and respect the dedication and the time that they have given to this point in time. And here comes Bob with the microphone. But it really is an important distinction. We have to make certain that we have to
Joe
make.
had his mic on first, so if he wants to go first, I'll let him go.
I just wanted to address, there's no secret to what the problem is. The problem is pay. It's what it comes down to. nobody wants to leave the Pittsburgh Police Department. These young kids that are leaving do not want to leave. They're not happy where they go, other than that they get a lot more money to be where they're at. We have an opportunity here in Pittsburgh, in this department, to do a lot of things. You're not just locked on as an officer. You have motorcycle patrol, you have a horse patrol, you have the detective branch. You have multiple things you can do. You can't get bored on this job. Promotion, there's such a great chance for promotion where you go to a borough and the sergeant's been the sergeant for 30 years. You don't have a chance. You're not getting in there as a sergeant or a lieutenant. So they don't want to leave here. You would not have, you would probably still have some staffing problems. It wouldn't be as bad if it wasn't for the pay. You can't have a pension that is below the poverty rate and expect people to say, yep, this is where I want to be. They're not going to stay. And when I took the test in 91, there was almost 4,000 people took the test. So when you talk about, well, we got 60 people to sign up for this, that 60 people is not going to help us in any way. We are, if nobody at the table wants to talk about it, we are at code red. We are so far below, and we are losing. Ross Township just gave their test, and there was a bunch of city kids that were there for the Ross Township test.
Including the chief.
Yes, the county test is coming up real soon. The county police test is coming up. There will be a lot of our guys will be at that test. I talk to the young kids constantly at the station. They are all going to test for SHACOG and everybody else. They're going to continue testing. They want out. They want to be gone. They don't feel respected. They're not getting paid. They can make thousands and thousands of dollars more everywhere else. We are here as far as pay. Everybody else is up here. When it comes to work, we're up here and everybody else is down here. So who's going to stay? So we could say, what do we need to do to make it so much better for just pay your guys and show them the respect they deserve and pay them a salary that they deserve, that everybody else is getting, and you'll retain those officers. They will stay here. There's too much opportunity here, too much to do here.
And what you're doing, Mr. Kraus, just to add to what Joe's saying, you asked how do you reward the veteran officer, et cetera. When you have the worst pension system in the Commonwealth, as far as it is police, we are worse than an Act 600 community. And if you understand, and I know you understand government pretty well, I've heard you speak eloquently at this table. When you talk about boroughs and township code and things like that, and then you talk about city to second class code, we're the worst. Our pension is nowhere equal to the boroughs and municipalities. They're pensioned on their total earnings. Their increments are substantially. We have not had a pension increment change since 1983.
That is governed through municipal government or
Oh,
state
no,
government?
you run that, sir.
We do.
The city council runs that. Pension is a collective bargaining right, and city council can pass an ordinance at any time to do whatever it is they need to do when it comes to pensions. You run the show. City council runs that show. So I just wanted to let you know about that. So when you have a pension system that's here, and you haven't had an increment change, a pension increment change since 1983, it's $20 for every month you stay beyond 20 years. That's it. If you go to Coriopolis, Kennedy Township, Robinson, Ross, Moon, it's $100 a month. 5 times what a city cop makes. And if you go by the most recent statistics published by the district attorney, when he examined the workload, as Joe speaks about, in the entire Allegheny County, Pittsburgh's performing 70 to 80% of all the police work, and everybody else is performing 20. Not to detract from those communities, but when we compare apples to apples or apples to oranges, we're doing 70 to 80% of the work. Everybody else is doing 20. So,
Yeah.
But yet we're paying well below the standard.
So I'm going to say it again. From the day I walked in the door, we've been having this conversation. We're 15 years into this right now. And as I opened my remarks with, and I'm going to close up shortly because I know other people want to speak, that this is not a one and done. There are multiple conversations that need to take place here. And I would argue that a meeting in and of itself entirely based on compensation for officers and how we better compensate and what that actually looks like. As fiduciary agents of the city, we mind the budget, and we've been here through the really difficult times when we had to say no to everything. And so I'm not here to scandalously open the checkbook and just write checks because we can write checks. But I do believe that is an honest question that some way, somehow I think we could to devote an entire conversation around compensation for police officers, what that looks like, and how we can do better.
That committee, why don't you schedule that?
I'll be happy to work with the councilman to do that. But I remember coming in, I served on the public safety chair and had that very conversation with Beth Pittenger at that time to talk about how we can better do that. One thing I would like to talk about briefly is assigning officers to special events. I get it. It drives me crazy that certain organizations have higher priority for police staffing than our residents have, and I get it to a point, but not a fan. But having said that, when, as fiduciary agents of the city, and we write the checks at this table, those events bring in enormous amounts of tax revenue, which feed the budget, which help us to be able to fund the things that we need to do. So I'm not defending either side. I'm only saying they have to exist in some level of harmony here, because we need the revenue that it generates, and yet at the same thing, our police force is not private detail security for the Roonies. Forgive me for saying that. It's probably a terrible thing for me to say, but we have to find a better way, and that could probably be a third conversation. Is just really, Kenny Chesney. I dropped to my knees at the mention of the name. Like, why is he coming to the town and allowing to just hemorrhage our public safety services and our public works services? And, because people can be drunken idiots and throw up on each other for a day. Just that kind of stuff drives me crazy. So I would.
Well, Councilman, if I could just offer one
Yes.
positive note on that front, I think we can say that the Kenny Chesney fan base is getting older, so the events are getting a lot less rowdy. I was at police headquarters this year during the concert just to sort of see how things were going for that, and it was much quieter than in past years. So that one, I think, the heyday of that being a disruption is thankfully in our past. But I would maybe just note that I wouldn't say that certain events get higher priority than the needs of residents. I think we have collectively, all of us, right, the police and council and the administration, have a responsibility to prepare adequately for what's happening in the city to protect everyone's safety, including the safety of residents when there's a mass event. Now, there are multiple ways that can be managed and ways that could potentially be done better or differently that we're happy to explore, but I don't believe that it's fair to say that we give those events priority. I'm not saying that you were insinuating that.
To
but-
correct my verbiage,
Yeah.
there's the expectation that we would, give them a higher priority, and largely from and by the promoters of those events. Let's leave it at that.
Fair enough. But
But I do believe, it is an important source of revenue. We are the downtown, if you will, to many surrounding communities. They do come here for entertainment and socialization, Carson Street. And, and we have to, yes, it's a great revenue generator. And at the same time, we are more than just private security for special events like that. The last thing I'm going to say, actually two more things, is our responsibility as planners and managers. That far too often, in the 15 years that I've been here now, I see situations where as either elected or appointed or employee positions fail to plan and manage in a proactive way to not have to find ourselves in a reactive situation, and that it just goes down the chain and we throw it off to police officers and say, well, I guess it's your mess to clean up. And that nothing drives me crazier than that. Carson Street, I've been fighting this fight for 20 years to understand that we can be effective planners and managers and stewards and create environments that that will be self-sustaining and that they can exist on their own. And only in the rare occasion that something goes off the rails do we call a police officer in. But the idea, and it's not you, please don't take it this way. This is my third administration. We can't seem to find solution to be proactive, and we end up being reactive and saying, well, just throw police officers into it because we don't know what else to do. And that might be the fourth conversation that we need to have. But I would like to exit my remarks by saying what a tremendous respect I have for Acting Chief Stan Grecki. I just find him to be an absolute gentleman, a real resource to the department. I'm very happy he's in the position that he is in. I understand how you need and want to find the best candidate. And you're not the first administration to go out and do a search for a chief since I've been here. And I understand your desire and responsibility to do that. But I just have the highest praise and support and recommendation for Acting Chief Stan Grecki. And I just find him to be a gentleman and a perfect person to be in the position.
Is that it, Councilman Kraus?
It is, but when you're ready, we'll start breaking down these conversations, I think, into manageable pieces instead of trying to eat the elephant one bite at a time and break it off into deliberate and detailed sections.
Yeah.
One of them being financial compensation. We all know that. You speak the truth when you say, now, will every problem go away when we pay better? Of course they won't. But, will it help 70%? I bet it will. But then how do we, as fiscal, responsible fiscal agents of the city here, how do we make those difficult decisions and make certain that we're writing the right checks at the right time in the right way?
Yep, good points, Councilman Kraus, and I will definitely take you up on that, and we should have all three parties here at the table when we talk about the pay scale of the police now and the future police. And I really wanted to consider this posted.
Pension board, I want to be there.
Yeah. And I really wanted to consider this post agenda really as a start of that. And then arbitrating our own, things that we can do outside of arbitration. So I'm hoping that's what comes from.
We all want the same thing.
Right.
We all want the same thing. We see what it is that we want. It's just how do we work backwards collectively to get there. That's it. Thank you. I'm done. I'm honest.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Good points. Councilman Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate you putting this together, and thanks for all the comments and questions I've heard so far. Maybe we could just stay on. I do have some separate questions other than the pay, but since we're on this topic, I just wanted to get my bearings on this. So, if someone, it seems like you all feel that pay is a big contributor to, I guess, if I looked at some of the issues of concern, like morale or recruitment. Can you specifically give an example? I know you gave an example of the pension, but what about the salary?
Jump in there, Jay. I'll
Yeah.
go after you.
I was going to say, I gave Councilman Coghill a 2004 contract of ours and a current that just expired contract through 2022. And we looked at the math, and the rate an hour for a master patrol officer who is 15 years on the job, in 18 years from 2004 to 2022, it's gone up $8.91 an hour in 18 years. So I think that was 66 cents a year on average.
About the average of a McDonald's employee, and I'm not
Yeah.
detracting from that.
No, and I gave that to
Yep.
the councilman.
Yep, it's actually in
We have
your
the contracts.
packets, right?
So it was $8.91 in 18 years, from '04 to '22. So that's just one example.
But what's
for
the
you.
rate?
The
What are
rate
we
now,
making now? You asking what we're making now?
The 15-year patrol person.
Well, we were making about $53,000 in 2004. Now we're at 78 with 30 years on the job. And if you walk onto the county police in 18 months, you're making 16,000 more than me with 18 months on. And I have 30 years here. My rate of pay is 78,000 at 30 years.
Is that what you'll have? as
I have the
well?
contract right here if you'd like to
Yeah,
see
yeah,
it,
I guess they
Mr.
would
Wilson.
know, yeah. I kind of feel caught sometimes because they're.
I'm not trying to box you in, I'll hand it.
No, I'm just like, yeah.
I'll hand it to you. I mean, you can see.
Yeah, no big deal to me. I just want to make sure we're all in agreement, like that's what we're talking about. So 78,000 for 15-year patrolman.
Or more.
Patrol person.
And detectives. That's what a detective makes as well.
Okay.
Master patrolman and detective are the same
Gotcha.
pay rate.
And so what was the comparison in the county?
On average, we're at either the worst or next to the worst. We're on par like Wilkinsburg. And I'm not detracting from them. That's probably why the
So
city wants it
you're looking at the different municipalities outside, and you're just
around us. That's correct. And our farm team that we mostly get farmed to are the sheriffs in the county. For example, just as an example, we talk about minority hiring. I have two very, very excellent African-American female officers that were on our job here. They were great officers. One was the only female bomb tech in the state, and the county sucked her right up in 18 months. She's now a bomb tech for the county in 18 months. And another one, a high-level degree from Duquesne University, worked in Zone 5, Northsider in your district, and she now works for the county sheriff's office, making about $94,000 and $95,000. And I could go on and on and on, but those are just two quick examples. If we talk about just minority hiring, you know, because where's everybody going to go? They're going to go where their services are going to pay them the best bang for their buck, so they can take care of their families. Even if it means not being a detective or a sergeant or a canine handler or riding a horse or a SWAT officer or whatever, they're going to go where they can guarantee their salary as they can. Because, you know, over 50% of county homicide are ex-city homicide. So they left here after 20 years. The county took them, raised their salary by 16 to 20,000, and now they're doing the same job they were doing here. They're just doing it for the county.
So what's the administration's take on like salaries in Pittsburgh versus outside municipalities and the challenges that the FOP is laying out?
I think we certainly agree that the disparity in salary between our force and the forces of other municipalities in the county is a leading reason why folks seek employment there who work on our force now. You know, salary's a subject of the collective bargaining process, of course. So that is a process we're currently in, the process of deciding a new contract through arbitration after a negotiating process. So we're limited on what we can, you know, really dig into there at this moment, given just where we stand in that process. But I don't think anyone at this table disagrees about the role that salaries play in that equation or that decision on the part of officers to seek employment with another police force. It's something that I think, agree needs to be addressed and something we've sought to address through the contract process over the last year, and something that we hope can be addressed before the process is complete.
It's something I never thought about, but which is the question I'm going to ask. Do outside municipalities have police unions?
That'd be a good question for the FOP. I know some of them do.
They have
Okay,
police
okay. I
associations.
just want to make sure that
Yeah, we're a
bargaining-
collective bargaining state, and every police agency in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is covered by a form of Act 111.
Okay, so everyone's going into this collective bargaining
Correct.
across the county.
Hey, Councilman, if I could just add, when I mentioned that 891, I would say a lot of that was Act 47 as well. You know, we had a lot of zeros, percents, 1%, 2% was high for us in a year. And now that's all caught up. And here we are at the end of Act 47, out of Act 47, and we're still dealing with it, with this.
So in terms of the numbers, I want to go back to some initial thoughts that I had when we were starting the conversation in terms of, you know, the slides that you presented. A question that I have is really just to start from the beginning. So what calculation are we doing to make sure that we have the amount of officers that we need at a zone? This is for the director of the administration, because I'm just wondering. Sorry, I was looking at you and I'm thinking I should just start directing my question. So I'd like to know. So we talk about overtime and officers not know when they're going to go home. So I'm really wondering how that all happens in real time. Like, do we have is it based on, what's it based on? You know, is it based on the calls that come in? Is it based on the cars that are available? I don't.
So at the beginning of the year, towards the end of the year in September, the chief has to prepare a pick list, meaning how many positions are at each zone, and then that's where the officers bid from. So it's up to the chief and the commanders to kind of decide how many officers they need deployed per shift, per zone, and per unit. Then that comes out from there. Where those numbers come from has been variations depending on who is chief, who the commanders are, what zone it is, the crime rate, political influence. There's a lot of different factors. That's one reason we've talked about the study. I think the study will help us kind of make sure that the numbers are where they need to be based on the data that's out there, the call volume, and the union has asked for some of this too, like how many do we need to have to be successful in the mission, right? We don't have a solid answer on that right now. As Bob mentioned, the last study that was done was 2005, right? Not sure what happened with the information in that study, but it wasn't necessarily followed. So what we need to do is once the matrix study is done, I think we sit down with the union, we talk to the officers, and figure out what makes sense where.
So
we
whenever
talk to
commanders
council
are
members
calling
as
for
well.
overtime, what are they basing that off of?
I can respond to that, Mr. Wilson. They don't know. We've asked for it for 25 years. I've often said, I make this very rude and off-the-cuff comment to get everybody's attention, but I said, you could police the city with one cop, the entire city. And everybody looks at you like you're crazy, right? Because I seen Bruce actually look up and he was going to say, I'm going to come over there in a minute. But the point is, your question is very valid. What is it you want them to do, and how do you get to that number? So how do you determine whether you're going to have overtime? I've had to litigate this issue. And without getting into all that, so we create an argument at this table, I've asked, well, do you need 10 on Monday or do you need 8? And what is it you want them to do? And if you can make that decision, then you need to publish that. But the fire department will tell you right now, if you call the fire department on the phone right now, you call Ralph Sikora upstairs, he's probably up on 9 watching this. And Ralph will say, I have 167 firefighters on this many pieces of apparatus ready to roll right now. If you call the paramedics, we'll say, we have this many ambulances in service with this many EMTs, this many paramedics. You call the police, they'll say, we have no clue. We'll get back to you in about 3 days, what we had out there. Because they don't know what it is they want you to do. They don't know how many cops they want out there. They don't know how many they need in the zone. They don't know how many they need in your zone. They don't know how many they need in Zone 5 zone. So they just leave it up to some sergeant or some lieutenant to wish and pick a number, because they won't publish the number for us. And we've been asking for this as long as I've been on the job. So I think your question's valid, and I hope you keep asking it.
But surely, so I appreciate your comments.
Candor.
But I'm just scratching my head because I would think that overtime is authorized, or is there a certain quota we're supposed to meet with? I guess I'm just confused on the whole conversation of overtime.
Every commander kind of authorizes and decides what they,
So each
When-
commander is
when.
in charge of
Correct.
what they're okay.
what that's based on is commander's experience and understanding what they need to carry out their mission.
Okay.
That's all.
So that gets to the study, the matrix study, and I'd like to hear some preliminary findings that you have discovered, and when we could expect to see that study.
I think you should
The
see
results of the study.
The full study should be completed within the next 6 weeks. I think you'll see, as was alluded to earlier, right now we do a very good job with the numbers we have. I mean, although they'd be dwindling, so we have to take that into consideration, what the future, what's going to impact those numbers. In the zones where we do very well, we respond well to calls, but what the study hasn't finished yet is evaluating the overtime, how much of that's covered by overtime, what happens when we have a marathon or a special event, what happens when we actually just have, Giant Eagle wants an officer at the store to cover for security, how that impacts staffing and how that impacts the amount of hours an officer works. So there's a lot that the study's going to get into that will show some of that information. But preliminarily, as they said, our response rate is very high, which I think we should be very proud of, especially considering the circumstances. Our officers do very well getting out there, responding to calls. There may be anomalies that sometimes a call takes a little longer, or something happens at the county, or something happens that our officers might not get there as quick as our average, but our average overall is much lower than any other city of our size, similar population.
And for the preliminary findings so far, is there
There's nothing
nothing really
released.
okay,
These are
nothing
more
released.
conversations.
Okay. I thought I heard. Yeah, I thought I heard. Actually, Chief, I thought I heard you say something about initial finding. So, threw me off for a second because I thought there was some updates on that. But okay, in that report, and during this time, knowing that this time they're evaluating the numbers, will there be like a description or a suggestion as to how we make it to, through X amount of time, and the way we would do it would be to, reorganize the force or the Bureau in terms of which officers or what responsibilities would could be done that are not sworn officers.
Yes, they will be reviewing civilianization of some positions. Even the FOP has brought up their officers that are doing work that doesn't need to be done by an officer. Officers need the tools to do their job successfully. Some of that means they have to have someone that can get involved on minor things that they don't need to spend their time on. So that the study will evaluate some of that. But the next step is how we actually make that successful. Some of that's a longer term project, but and all this is discussion. That doesn't mean we need less officers. We need to make sure we're utilizing everybody the most effective manner, that we don't have officers going to doing menial tasks. When they are trained to be officers, they should be officers.
Okay.
And the study, does evaluate that. It will also make some recommendations, and then the data will be for the chiefs to review and commanders to review and make some educated and data-driven decisions about staffing.
Okay. And then I do have a question about the implementation of an alternative response. So there's been a lot of discussion about, and we've invested in different programs, and just want to get, for instance, the Office of Community Health and Safety plays a part, but also the Roots program. Just want to get an update on how that fits into what will come out of the study and how that's going. Like how would that implementation, when can we expect to see some sort of rollout in terms of what alternative response looks like?
Well, as you know, council approved the expansion of the Roots program. One thing we found, so I'll use Zone 2 as an example. On a weekly basis, there's a case conferencing with our police and with the Roots team to talk about people that the police are seeing frequently that might be in mental health crisis, might have a housing issue, and other things. They meet on a regular basis. The police do utilize the Roots team on a regular basis. They've been very helpful. Our officers have given us a lot of good feedback. One part where we're missing is that Roots team is only available for very limited hours because we only have 3 people that cover all of Zone 2. So as we expand it, I think, the pilot seems to be successful, and we're going to continue to go in that direction and expand that program hand in hand with police. The idea would be to allow police to be available for violent responses, urgent calls, higher priority calls, rather than dealing with minor issues. Also to have the police have somewhere to send folks that do have a minor violation, rather than having to take them to jail because they don't have an address or having them get processed. They can put them directions to get help and do some of the proactive stuff, as Councilman Kraus mentioned.
So in terms of the police class, I just want to get just verify the number. So I heard the number 60 have signed up for the class. Where do I have the number 60?
No, so so we test every month, or HR, I'll put it this, they do police testing once a month.
Yeah.
Used to be annually or used to be every so many months, but monthly they test. Prior to removing the credit requirement, those numbers that would show up for the test were between 8 and 15 on average. Over the past 2 to 3 months, this is the third month, I'm not sure what the testing rate was for this month, I'd have to find out. But for November and December, those numbers were in the 40s, 30s and 40s for those tests.
Okay.
So that's how many people show up for the test. That's not how many
Yeah.
applications we get.
Gotcha.
Normally, applications are even higher than that. But people that actually showed up the day HR coordinated the testing, came and took our initial civil service exam to get on the list.
So
of
Councilman Wilson, would
so-
you
so
like
what
to know
would
how
the-
many's in the class right now?
I'm going to ask that.
We have a
question.
veteran class right now.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the veteran class.
3.
I was going to ask
There's 3
about-
there right now. They started Monday. We have 3 there. We lost 3 last week. So just so you're aware.
Okay.
So we put 3 on this week. We lost 3 last week.
I was going to ask about the other class, the one that is, I don't know, what do you call it? The other one's called the veteran class. This one's called basic recruit class. Okay, so that's going to start when?
That's planned to start in July. So the packets went out
Okay.
this month. Packets come back. There's a background process. There's testing processes that all happen, and that class will start in July.
So,
And that's what I meant by the 60, just for clarity, Councilman. Of the, I think, 258 packets that we sent out, 60 of those were to people who had come in to test since we dropped the 60 credit requirement.
okay.
People test, not everybody passes the test.
Yeah,
But
so,
if you
so,
pass
so the
the
amount of
test-
people we have signed up ready to go for that July class is how many?
So what
It's not-
what
that's
HR
not
said,
good.
people come in and then people who are on the list who passed the initial sort of screening,
Right.
right, get invited to come to the class. I think we are sending more than we have in years past. The ratio has typically been something like 6 packets to seat in the class. I think we went a little higher than that just to make sure that we were capturing as many folks as possible. And so there was just to clarify that of the 258 packets we sent out, which are kind of like invitations, 60 of those were to people who had expressed interest since we dropped the sort of gating requirement of 60 credits.
But I think if I'm following your question correctly, Councilman, as Lisa just said, 258 people were sent a packet. We don't, did I get that number right? Yeah, and we don't yet know how many of them will return it. And from there, folks sometimes drop out of the process for any number of reasons between now and July. So the answer to the question of how many are going to be, in a chair in the academy on the first day of the class, we don't know yet. But
So the packets were sent out to people that came in the HR, took the qualifications.
and pass the test, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Gotcha. That's a lot of moving numbers here. So how many people signed up for the last class, or how many were in the last class that we had?
Bob just mentioned 3.
Well,
Not
mean-
including that.
I'm being honest.
yeah, no, I know you're being honest. I guess I wasn't bringing it up because I kind
Well, I
of.
mean, unfortunately,
Well, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So there's 3 in the veteran class, but Jason has the numbers for the last recruit class. If you want to know, like, the last basic recruit class?
Yes.
It was
Give him the date, Jason, and
yeah,
what the
there
number was.
30 of those that completed, May of 21. 30 graduated to work the street, and there's 26 left right now.
You said graduate. How many entered?
It was been a class of 30. They all
Okay,
made
so-
it through.
okay, so it's not like a.
Yeah.
Now, Jason, we only accept a class of 30, or we accept a larger class, and I'm trying to,
Well, it's my impression that when they went to the new building on the north side, they said that they could only fit 30 in the building to teach it properly. But when we were out on Washington Boulevard, we would have classes of 40. So
Okay.
that's what I was told.
So the hope is 30.
And out of that 30,
well, I mean, the max we've
4 have gone already, left out of that 30.
Yeah.
They've resigned.
They
Went other
resigned.
places. From that original 30 that we hired.
It'll take, if they have 258 packets sent out, you'll need every one of them probably to get a class of 30.
All right. Is there an opportunity to run 2 classes simultaneously?
So no, what's been done at one point, I don't know, a few years ago, the city was running 3 classes somewhat annually, right? So there was a little overlap. What we can do, the academy can fit about 35, which is, we normally start, HR tries to get a list of about 40 that's going to start. Some of those possibly drop out. 35 or so is what will start in the academy, knowing that a few may leave. But yeah, we can't run them exactly the same time, but there is a gap that eventually, once they're in field training, we can start another classroom. We are looking to see what we can do with that, but with this current staffing we have at the academy and space we have at the academy, we are somewhat limited.
Okay. And is there a reason why we can't move the class up to tomorrow? The one that's in.
It's the background check. So the process to
okay.
come on, it takes about 6 months because we do polygraph exams, physical, their Nelson Denny reading tests, a thorough background checks. OMI has to go out, meet with neighbors, meet with people. There's a very long vetting process, psychological exams, all that. That takes HR about 6 months. We have 5 to 6 months. We did talk to them about trying to condense that, and the only way they could do that is if we would add, more staffing for OMI and polygraphs and everything else.
So, and that's something you like. That's just a standard thing.
That's all
go
required by
through.
state
Yeah,
legislation
so it's
through
all-
MOPEC, the administrative agency that administers how you hire a
'Cause
cop.
that's a question we get a lot, in the community. They go, well, why can't it just happen tomorrow? So it's good to walk through that.
The
But
administrative agency controls
Yeah.
that, Mr. Wilson.
Okay.
That's by statute, by state statute.
okay, all right, great. Well, I don't have any further questions. I'm appreciative of the
No,
the time.
thank you,
Thanks.
Councilman Wilson, good questions. And I just wanted to make a note, the 5 council members that are here, and I believe Councilman Lavelle, we did trek over to Lodge headquarters, and Jason ran us through all these numbers, much more detailed, much more complex than what I showed you today. But, so we are familiar, and I just wanted to thank the members who did take the time out to come to the academy, or to the headquarters that day. So, yeah. Councilwoman Strasburg, thank you for being so patient. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Councilman, for calling this post agenda. I really appreciate your leadership here and your work.
You're welcome.
Thank you all for being here today. I appreciate it, and for what you do every day. So, I also am grateful to my colleagues for the questions, because they did ask some of the questions like pay and like other, morale that I wanted to touch on. I do still have a few I'd like to ask, and I'll jump right in with, I guess this touches on both city, county, and bordering municipalities even, and morale, those 2 topics. So, notwithstanding Councilman Krause's suggestion to table this or to have a separate discussion, which I certainly think we should, I wanted to ask, really, if we are, as has been stated, making decisions about what we want our police to be doing, and the answer is to protect and serve, to police, or to protect and serve, put another way. And let's just say that, even though we need to balance the revenue that's brought in by special events, large special events, but we acknowledge that the mandated overtime is taking away from, it might be costing us money, and that's a concern, but also, I think more importantly, it is one of the contributing factors to the diminished morale of this force, because everyone needs time with their families, everyone needs time to recoup, everyone needs time for a night off, a weekend, etc. What is the barrier? And I really don't know the answer to this, so I'm not setting anyone up. I'm really curious. What is the barrier, either logistical or labor or otherwise, that would stop us from partnering with the county sheriffs and neighboring municipalities to form an agreement to say, we acknowledge that it is residents from the city and the county who are coming to these large events. We want to share the responsibility for staffing these events. Has that been discussed? And if it's been taken off the table, why?
Well, there's no barrier here. The way that secondary employment works, as long as they offer it to our officers first, if our officers don't take it, we work that agreement out with the chiefs many years ago, many years ago. The problem that you're running into, and that may be a question more suited to the county executive, their overtime, et cetera, goes into their pension. So whenever you bid for one of them to work, we're the cheapest cop on the block. That's why they love us, because when they bring us in, we're not pensioned on that money, and so on and so forth. So the city doesn't have a minimal municipal obligation like the county does. So if a county officer comes in and works that, or a county sheriff comes in, and if the state police come in and work it, wow. I mean, I'm good for them. I mean, I'm not taking away from them. But all that money goes towards their pension. So they surcharge for those charges. In other words, they're not going to pay that. Like the county's not going to absorb that cost to give you that officer for overtime. So I think the question is more appropriately, ma'am, addressed to the county executive and their labor union, because we already know how we operate. So I think to get them to come in, there's going to have to be a serious discussion about how that additional cost towards their pension plan, et cetera, is going to be addressed. Mm-hmm. That's my position based on what I know of those bargaining units.
Okay.
And I
thank
work
you.
closely with them.
That's helpful. Are there other responses from Director Schmidt or?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have anything to contradict that.
Okay.
That we do currently work with county police and county sheriffs for those events.
I should
However-
distinguish, I said
Yeah.
sheriff, but I meant county forces in general, yeah.
And to the FOP president's point, most organizers try to use as many city officers as they can because it is a lower cost to them. We don't necessarily give them a choice at times. Picklesburg this past year is a good example. We weren't able to fill it, so it did go to the county. The organizer then came to me and others and didn't love the bill they received. So it's a balance working with the organizers. As Councilman Kraus stated, they do bring revenue because of the taxes and visitation, but I think that's a much larger discussion between the administration and the county administration about how we continue to work together on those things without breaking the bank, so to speak.
What about neighboring boroughs?
Most neighboring boroughs, I don't believe, and they could correct me if I'm wrong, but most of them don't have the staffing to provide much coverage for that. Also, training-wise, we have those relationships. It would take a whole nother level of agreement for a bureau that has no overlapping jurisdiction to come into the city.
Okay. Do we know what the sort of standard regular time versus overtime ratio is? Like the industry standard, what it should be and what ours is and how it compares to that? Is there any kind of industry standard for like regular time versus overtime?
Not necessarily industry standard. What we have seen is, and this is many administrations, at least since the beginning of Act 47 in the city, so I can speak to the city specifically. It is technically less expensive overall to pay overtime in dollars only, not in human costs. Mm-hmm. So when you add the human costs, like the wearing out of the officer, illnesses, things of that, then it begins to weigh. But in just dollar for dollar, it is less expensive because you're not hiring the officer, you're not paying for the pension, you're not paying for the health care, you're not paying for the training. But in human cost, it becomes a serious problem. So there's really we pay an astronomical lot of money. And I tell you what, I can guarantee you, we've damaged some marriages and some serious relationships because of this job. A lot.
Well, related to that, it's a good segue. I personally found that the 2020 report, the Community Task Force on Police Reform, and their recommendations was eye-opening, it was collaborative, and it was helpful. Are we still tracking that and our response to that versus what was recommended? We are. Great. So some of the questions specific to that, what initiatives have been launched? Recognizing fully what I've already heard, that one of the number one contributors to, say, morale and the potential for increasing morale is higher pay and pension, to both retention and morale. Are there initiatives that have been launched since then to promote officer wellness, and especially in light of the sharp reduction in the number of officers serving.
I mean, we are working with OCHS to develop some more officer wellness. We did add a position for a full-time that was part-time in OCHS to full-time, a person who already does a lot of wellness work. I think it can continue to be expanded, but I also think a big portion of our wellness concerns right now is, I mean, to be honest, is staffing. So I think adding these classes and looking towards the future of how we staff the Bureau is critical to that, because we can provide all the services we want, but when we have officers working double shifts 3 times a week, it doesn't help.
I recognize that a class can feel like a Band-Aid when we have potentially shortages. Now, I also want to recognize the question that you posed before and that Mr. Schwartzwelder, you had posed. We don't actually know what the number is. The data-driven number is for the number of officers that are adequate and sufficient for what we want to accomplish in this city and on this force. So stating that, I think we still know that being asked for what they're being asked to do at this current moment, right, there's a shortage. Let's see here. I want to move to another idea in the same vein of the question I asked before around just potentially creative solutions to the amount of time spent. In 2019, our office, like many other offices across the city, county, country, really delved into policing, and we produced this report. It's still available on our website, our District 8 website, and found that in 2019, using 911 data, Pittsburgh police spent about 19% of their time responding to incidents and activities that could be addressed by civilians. And I know this is part of the matrix study as well. Has that number changed? And in addition to what we've already heard, have we considered, so as you mentioned, Chief Frank, right, reporting of non-emergency type of, and if you mentioned Councilwoman before as well, non-emergencies such as like a stolen bike, stolen lawnmower, reporting only rather than officer responding. The other idea that I keep coming back to is, can we assign non-moving or parkings type of violations to non-officers, non-police? Have there been conversations with the parking authority? Have there been conversations with other organizations to help relieve some of that? Because what we found was that was number one, not in the number of call types, but the number of minutes of time in 2019. And just to relieve, I mean, I'm talking about short-term solutions, not the long-term staffing up, but short-term solutions to the number of hours spent on things other than protecting and serving.
So when they're in a zone, a parking zone, you do have parking authority that handles that.
Yep.
The overwhelming majority of the time that a police officer responds, you have a blocked driveway, you're in a disability spot. I'm sorry, you're in a blocked driveway, a disability spot, et cetera, is when the police typically respond. Whether that's been altered or not, would be news to me. Joe can maybe speak to that if that's been altered. But you need a police officer to tow the car because that's covered under the vehicle code. So typically the police have to respond, issue a citation, fill out a tow slip and have it towed, because then the city's responsible for the care, custody, and control of that vehicle until it's released. So that's pretty much city policy. But if you're talking about just a parking meter, we don't deal with that. I mean, the police do not respond to those types of calls. So I think, Councilwoman, if I may, I think, I don't know your data. Like, I don't know what you actually track, so I'm going to read your study.
I think you did point to a couple of the exact type of opportunities that we've been exploring and would like to advance for this same purpose. So you mentioned telephone reporting as opposed to needing an officer to respond in person to take a police report. That's seemingly a fairly straightforward way to reduce that time burden. In the same vein, Lisa mentioned it earlier, false alarms from security systems, in particular in commercial buildings. There are places that do it residentially too that would be slightly more complicated, and so maybe would take some more time to implement. But something like 98%, 97% of the security system alarms in commercial buildings are false alarms. Think the shift manager at a restaurant comes in to open the place up, forgets the security code, puts it in wrong, and it goes off, right? That's the vast majority of those, but we do an in-person officer response to each one of those calls presently. And there are models of what's called verified response, where private security, meaning that the existing security for the building, if you think of an office building or something that has a security guard, they would essentially verify whether an alarm is a false alarm or a true emergency before an officer's dispatched. That could reduce the amount of time officers spend, running down dead ends significantly. I think Officer Schwartzwelder was correct as it relates to parking enforcement issues. Under law, he mentioned the vehicle code, which is an important one there. There are certain situations where, as currently structured, it would be difficult for someone else to respond. I do think, to the extent permitted, we're very open to and have had some preliminary conversations with the parking authority, not about taking over those enforcement actions that only a police officer can do. But if there are ways we can collaborate more closely around that, that would be advantageous to everyone.
And I do recognize that hiring is an issue. You serve on the parking authority, so I won't let you answer too, but I want to recognize that hiring is an issue everywhere, right? Hiring is a challenge for the parking authority currently, so I know it's not going to be an immediate, silver bullet answer. But
I was just going to make a comment in regards to parking. Not actually because I'm on the parking authority board,
okay.
but just working on some legislation dealing with, what the parking authority could, ticket for, and finding the ordinance that was done, years ago, that does lay out all the different powers that the city gives the authority. So it does. I'm not sure each one, but for instance, it expands more than just the metered area.
I agree.
Yeah. So what's interesting is, because I've thought about this, is, well, I guess I should say the question I don't know, and I'm going to stop here because it's your time to question. The question I don't know is, if there's ever an appetite for that, how do you integrate that into dispatch?
So I care about our both reality and perception of citywide public safety. I care about police-community relations, and I care about the well-being of our officers and our police force, right? So hopefully I've made that clear through my line of questioning, that the wellness and the time off and the pay is important to me. So when it comes to police-community relations, no one knows better than those sitting before me how long a process it takes to build trust in the community, in some communities more than others, that it's a human-to-human connection, that it is, it just takes time. This gets to both that and the morale question. So when I hear about lower morale within our ranks, and I also think about, I don't want to bring this up, but I feel like I have to, the justification for discarding the council's legislation barring certain minor traffic offenses as pointing to both the discrepancy at the state level, but also low morale. It is disturbing to hear, because I think about if it's morale that is one of the reasons for reinstating those certain minor traffic stops, especially in light of the horrific incident in Memphis with Mr. Nichols and his murder. I can't help but make a connection in my mind between a diminished morale and a traffic stop gone wrong. I hear exactly what you're saying, that you have to take every incident as it comes. You can't extrapolate out and, paint a broad picture. But that's where my mind goes, and I had to be honest about that. I know we've heard again and again, we don't have a Scorpion group like there exists in Memphis. We don't have the Baltimore Gun Trace Task Force here in Pittsburgh. We don't have anything like that. But what can everyone here say to assure me that we are not on the path towards something like that happening in Pittsburgh?
I'd like to respond. If you look at our OMI data, there's nothing in our OMI data that supports that. And do you know we have one of the easiest complaint processes in probably the country? Do you know that somebody can complain about a police officer via text? Via text. They can send a text message to OMI and say, I have a disagreement with this officer. They don't even have to show up. They could just send an email. It could be anonymous. We have one of the easiest complaint systems in the country to raise those complaints against officers, and it's very low. And the most common complaint is rudeness. Yeah. Nothing even close to use of force. So, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, Mr. Straussberger, but when we talk about incidents that are very horrific in law enforcement around the country, I prefer to stick to incidents that happen with Pittsburgh police. And I tend to look and be very proud of the men and women that I represent, and they're very, very professional, in spite of many of them being maimed, shot. Some of them were nearly killed a few weeks ago after Chief McIntyre was killed, and there was an individual that opened up on him with automatic weapons fire at about from my distance to Councilman Krause's, and I didn't hear anybody worry about those two police officers were nearly murdered with automatic weapons fire. So I don't think we have that here. We don't have those problems here. I'm not saying that you could never have it, but I think if we're going to stay focused, we never raised an issue that we needed the low-level traffic stops for officer morale. I never heard the FOP ever raise that issue. We've never raised that issue. When that order was issued, we didn't say a word. The city of Philadelphia's FOP sued. We never said anything. I think what the chief did was based on accreditation is why he reinstated that. That was a command strategic decision. That didn't come from us. So if you're hearing that, I apologize. We did not raise that issue about a traffic stop and not us not being able to enforce low-level traffic stops as a morale issue.
And I apologize. I did not intend to insinuate that came from you.
Okay.
That was Acting Chief Stangrecki was quoted in the news saying that.
And I can actually, I think, address that a little bit. When that happened, I talked to Chief Stangrecki, and I actually talked to Councilman Krause about this yesterday. So when he said morale, it's not that police want to pull people over because that helps morale. The morale issue came from confusion, both from the officer side and the community side, about what that law meant and how it was interpreted by not only our officers, but also the community. I've had officers tell me they pulled people over for going through a stop sign after that legislation was passed. And the person said, you're not allowed to pull me over for this anymore. So right away, it becomes a negative engagement for something the officers were still expected to, and I believe should still pull people over for. He unfortunately spoke and said morale, but didn't embellish that. I think it's a matter of we want to make sure everyone is clear as to what the rules are and what the laws are, that officers are well understood, and we believe our officers do the right thing on a regular basis, every day. They're out there, they're having thousands of engagements with community members without any negative concerns. But also the community has to be aware of what that means, because as you know, some of the stories that got out publicly was Pittsburgh's not pulling people over for speeding, they're not pulling people over for going around a stop school bus. There was a whole lot of iterations of that law that went out publicly that was not what actually happened. So, as I mentioned to Councilman Krause, what we'd like to do is take a look at it, review both what we're explaining and training the officers for, and ensuring that our policy meets the intent behind that legislation and that our training meets that, but also that we are clearly communicating and educating the public about what that legislation means and what we believe in our officers, which is They're not just randomly pulling people over to cause harm to anyone. I don't believe any of our officers do that ever. Unfortunately, it does happen across, in places. There's been incidents. Even here, there's been incidents, but I think the Bureau has always changed and adapted and improved what we do. And we take those incidents as they come.
If I could just add, ma'am, you talked about the community-oriented. The previous administration had added 3 neighborhood resource officers to every zone. So that was 18 people across the city that was dealing with neighborhood issues. Then on top of that, we had 2 CROs, which were community-oriented. But as a sign of the times, we've just had to downsize, and the NROs, I think 2 years ago, they just went away because we couldn't.
Right.
We had to focus on the radio calls, and we didn't have the luxury, But I think it's not because those people didn't want to do it anymore. It was just we had to downsize, and they kind of just faded away for now.
And what's become, oh, I'm so sorry.
No, go ahead.
What's become apparent to me is that the great work that we have where we send, officers into schools, into every PPS school in the city, right, to engage with them and to do, scenarios and just to educate them on what police do. Like, that's going to be the first thing to go, right? NRIs, CROs are going to be the first things to go when we when we have to prioritize the calls coming in. And I fully recognize that. Yeah. Okay. Those are my questions. My computer just died, so I think it's a sign I should probably stop and let our next council person. I know, but I really appreciate it. Those were this extended my questions, and I really appreciate your candor.
Councilwoman, thank you for your great questions, and thank you for not being afraid to take on the sensitive issues as well. I'm glad you mentioned that. Councilwoman Warwick, I'm sorry you had to be last, and but
No, it's good.
next time I have a post agenda, I'm starting at this end and working this way, okay? But last but not least, Councilwoman Warwick.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's good because I actually got to hear everyone, and so sort of I don't think I have as many questions as just sort of a few comments. I do, similar to Councilwoman Strasburger, I do want to just, for the sake of, not so much for you guys, but to address what Councilman Kraus and Council President said earlier, I think that we need to respect there is a perception of policing, right, across this country. It's there, and it's there for a reason, right? Like, I grew up personally, I went to high school in Los Angeles. My personal first experience was with Rodney King, right? You have George Floyd. We have just the incident in Memphis just the other day. I mean, these things are happening across the country. There is a long history behind it, especially for our communities of color. So that should be acknowledged, and I think respected by all parties. So the fact that folks on Facebook and social media and whatever, that there is this perception, it is an issue. It's something that we would love to resolve, but there's a reason that it's there, and I think it's worth acknowledging that reason. That said, what we're here to do at this table is sort of the practical work of governing, right? And so we can't. We have to, and today that's talking about the staffing issue, which is also very real, right? So I guess I kind of have the advantage of being new. This is my first time doing this. I really appreciated the briefing that we had at FOP headquarters. That was super informative, and not what I expected, so I do want to say, so in my district in particular, there are lots of residents who are very pro-police, pro-law enforcement, very supportive. And I think that while in being supportive, there's also sort of a little bit of like blinders on to the fact that we are asking police officers to do all things and be all things, and that just can't, that doesn't work, right? So there's perhaps a bit of a lack of understanding of exactly what it means. And so one thing that we talked about, which really jumped out at me as a practical solution, Councilwoman Strasburger touched on it, is this idea of self-service reporting. And I feel like those communities, as residents, and even today, right now, right, regardless of whether we have a policy in place or not, today, right now, one of the best things you can do to support officers is if you're calling in and it's, don't call in because your kid won't go to school in the morning. Don't call in, or you can call, but that's not for an officer to come to your house, right? If your lawnmower is stolen or your car is broken into, recognize that this is not going to launch an investigation with a detective, that this is just a report that needs to be filed, and that is something you can do over the telephone. And I personally, I would like to see us move toward actually that being the standard, right? So that if you call, and of course it would be up to the discretion of the dispatcher, but that those calls sort of move into maybe the realm of 311 or something like that, just non-urgent calls, because we have these highly trained officers, and we do want them, right, dealing with some very scary, violent behavior that is also going on in this city, right? So let's let them do the job that they've been trained to do. But with something like that, I do want to say, because we talked about the misconceptions maybe around the pulling folks over for minor traffic violations. If we were to do something like that, because there was lots of chatter on sort of the pro-law enforcement side about that too, like, oh, we're not letting people do their job anymore, we're not. So if we were to do a self-service reporting model down the road, I think, and this is maybe where the FOP, it would be really important for the rank and file to be on board with that, and to, out in the Facebook groups and whatever, express to their friends and family and neighbors and whatever that this is good, like this helps them as law enforcement officers, and that's why we would be doing it, if we did do something like that. I also love the idea of the parking authority taking over, dealing with abandoned vehicles. I mean, I know that there are lots of things that could get tripped up with that, maybe city ordinances, but I think that the idea that yes, we can do that, right? We have private tow companies that you can get. If you own a parking lot, you can have a private tow company take a car. I don't know the details behind how that works, but it seems to me that that's something we could do without making it too complicated. As far as the pay issue, that's a sticky one, because there's already so much budget, right, going into, and we've got roads to maintain and bridges to build and rec centers to staff and all the other things that we need to do in the city. So for that, I mean, I guess I would really sort of turn that to Director Schmidt. In the realm of public safety, we're talking about reimagining public safety overall, right? And in doing that, we can't continue to treat the police like this island in and of yourselves, right? Where you're sort of, you're sort of left holding the bag, right? When it comes to this giant public safety budget, like it's all on the police. At least that's sort of, like, I think the public deserves to really understand what that public safety budget looks like. What are we putting into fire? What are we putting into EMS? How many calls are being answered? What is the staff? What do the pensions look like? And I'm sure, I know there's people freaking out there, but these are things that folks need to know, because there's sort of this kind of concept like, oh, well, it's all, everything's good for everything else in public safety, but not for the police, right? Like not, so I think that just as a department overall, and then there's the Roots team, and we want social workers, and we want all these things, right? We want this new version of public safety, and so and that is a benefit and a burden for each part of the department. So I think it would be helpful for the public and certainly for us to kind of understand that better. Where are the police carrying the load? A disproportional amount of the load when it comes to budget requirements and pay and set, looking at those differences in pensions and whatnot. If only just so that people can understand, right, what it is, why it is so hard to recruit police officers versus these other areas of public safety. I guess for the FOP, if there is something in the contract that keeps us from hiring other folks to do the overtime, hopefully that's something that can be resolved, so that we can use the county and other municipalities and whatever, or maybe private, I don't know, whatever it takes to staff these big events, so that your folks can keep doing, the important work of like protecting and addressing violent activity, and then come in should that type of activity happen at those events, then you're actually available to deal with it, and also, and again, this is really about how you operate, but in terms of the overtime hierarchy, I would strongly, I know that there's a hierarchy where overtime is like the older officers don't have to do the same overtime as the younger officers, but that's a huge burden, and again, like when the staff isn't there, like today, the staff isn't there, right? And if that's a way that you guys maybe amongst yourselves could figure out a way to make it less painful for these younger officers who have families, who have, to not be carrying that overtime burden. And then finally, and this is the one, when we're talking about the fleet, and I'm just going to say this because it's like, why not, I'm sure I've annoyed multiple people in the past 2 minutes. So I grew up with horses. I love horses. We all love horses. Horses are so expensive. And it's so charming and lovely to have them at the parades. But, I know in my own community, you can hire a petting zoo at your parade, and that's also fun. And I don't know how much we're spending on these horses. And, but I know that if there are issues with fleet, I know it's a lot. I know that horses are expensive. It costs so much money. And I know that there's like a whole barn. I don't know how many horses we have, but and I'm not asking anybody to comment necessarily. I'll hold that one myself. But it's something to look at, something to consider, if there are cost savings and we can move that money to, other things like maintaining our vehicles, et cetera. That is, at the very least, something to consider. And I'm sure that there are numerous farms out in Pennsylvania that would be more than happy to adopt retired police horses and let the kids come and visit them and pet them and whatnot. So I guess that's all for me. Thank you all so much for coming.
Wait a second. Thank you, Councilwoman Warwick. Well, as I said from the start, I've been talking to both sides on a regular basis. I just have a few suggestions. I'm hoping that we can come to a consensus and say we can continue these talks, okay? First and foremost, arbitration is not going to solve our immediate problem as the declining numbers. We are on pace to be at 669 police officers. That's on the January of 25. And nothing's going to change unless we put extra recruiting classes on. And we can't do that. So we're definitely headed to that direction, and I would venture to even say it's going to be below 669. I would say it's going to be more like 650, okay, because we use conservative numbers here as to, the police we lose per year. I'm going to suggest a couple of things, and I talked to both sides about this, and I hope we can continue this conversation. First is the recruitment classes, okay? Whenever that first branch or whatever that first group gets out of the classroom and into field training, we are committed to having another class start immediately following. Is that correct? Or can we talk about it?
Yeah, it's our intention to continue recruitment classes After
Always.
this one is into training.
Right, so
Yes.
we're going to continue the packets are going to continue coming to HR, and we have a recruitment class of 200. We're going to take 30 from there, and the next class it's just going to be simultaneously as for now until we decide what that number is. We know 669 is unsustainable. Jason, I believe Jason knows his numbers and his facts, and he thinks it should be about 950. We budget for 900, so who's to say what that number is? All I can say is we're going to need multiple recruitment classes, not just the one. So I want to just make sure that we're all in agreement to that. The other thing was, I believe strongly we need an incentive to keep retired officers who are eligible to retire on. Now, we've heard many different things. There's a deferment retirement option plan. There could be a signing on or a staying on bonus of some sort. But we're getting bled from two different ways. We're getting bled from the retirements and also the resignations, which I got news for you. Most of our retirements are kind of seeking new employment opportunity. Very few of them, they're 45, 50 years old, are sailing off into the sunset. They're going with the county and county police and county sheriff's office. But so I believe strongly that if we sit down, and I've talked to the union about this, and we've talked about this, creating some sort of incentive until we get those new classes on the street. And that's about a 3-year period before we actually have a rolling out, multiple people in multiple classes. So we need to stop, number one, the new recruits, or the resignations. That's hard to stop because, these other municipalities are free to do whatever they want, make offers to our people. So I believe we need to have something in place to keep the folks that are eligible to retire, 25 years plus service, I would say, and keep them on board at least until we can get, more recruits in the field. To that point, as far as, when these municipalities come calling and they say, hey, we got a job, we're going to pay you an extra $30,000 a year, we can't just let them go for $8,000. Chief Frank and I had this conversation. We cannot make them sign a contract to say, oh, we're going to stay with Pittsburgh for 5 years. Preferably, that's what I would like to see. But we can't do that by law. But what we can do is up our costs. So when Monroeville comes calling to one of our police officers, not only should we gain back what we have in training, we should gain back the pain and the rear that it takes to put another trainee through the recruitment class. And what does that mean to us? Are we allowed to set that price? For me, it's so easy for them to pick our police officers off. But if they have to go back to their council and say, oh, yeah, we're hiring 2 people from the city of Pittsburgh, but it's going to cost us $100,000 or $50,000, we need to put a monetary figure on that to stop that, because that is more problematic than the retirements. We know the retirements. We expect, that's why we have recruitment classes in order, because we're expecting so many, 35 or so, to retire per year. What I feel this administration certainly is new at it, and I think it caught us all off guard, and the last administration as well, is the amount of the amount that are going to other police forces. We didn't see this coming, but now that has outweighed our retirements. In fact, if you look at the first part of this year, we got 14 that left for other stations and 3 that are staying for others. So that I would like to see. Now, in the long term, okay, that's just short term. So we can keep our level, whether it's 700, 800, or 900, whatever the matrix study or whatever this administration deems is necessary there. Got to do it, right? I mean, there's just no getting around that. So in the long term, I believe strongly, and we've talked about this, Bob and Joey and Jason, the amount of time that a police officer has to put in for the Pittsburgh Police Force to hit that retirement where they can start collecting their pension is 20 years, okay? That needs to change. That needs to go to 25 years. And I don't think you all disagree with that. You might reluctantly not want to do that, but I mean, and this does 2 things. First of all, this will increase, and I'm not talking for us at this table. This is for people 10, 15 years down the road when they're dealing with this same problem. This will increase the pension fund, will make it healthier,
At the same time, you know, the longevity of the police force will be there, and I feel strongly that that has to change. You can comment on this, a closing comment of whatever I'm saying, you know, when the time comes. To continue to aggressively raise the salaries, like Councilwoman Kill-Smith says, you know, you hear the Gainey administration is trying to defund police. I don't believe any of that. I believe that, you know, Ed Gainey has a big heart. He wants the city to be safe. He's out there everywhere. I don't believe this is his way of defunding the police. I think we all got kind of caught off guard. And if this were a normal set of circumstances, the offer that you gave to the FOP would be considered a generous one if it had not been neglected for the past 30 years, I think, you know, as far as the pay scale goes. So I think that's fair to say. I think you all came to the table and made a fair, you know, offer. I think the FOP rightfully needs to get this up to speed, and it reminds me of kind of what we did on council. You know, we didn't have a raise for 25 years. We tried to get all 20% back in one swoop, and that didn't go very well. But so I feel there's some similarities here where the FOP, we know how underpaid they are compared to the municipalities surrounding us, and that, as Joey Nicholas said, that's the main problem. It's about money. It really is. When it comes down to it, people are leaving for a better living. So I would like some, you know, I want that conversation to happen. As Councilman Kraus said, next time we meet, we don't need the arbitrator's decision to sit down and have these conversations. And really, I think to end it, I feel like we need a new training center. We need to get out of these leases, these, you know, whether it's community college. I mean, they're costing us a fortune. And whether it's to start building up at the, you know, Washington Boulevard site and just having a police training center. And I know Councilwoman Gross is not here, but she would be thrilled that if we can move an indoor shooting range there as well. So I would just like a commitment from both of you, because I didn't want to come here and just go back and forth and who's right and who's wrong. I just would like to know if you're all willing to talk about these things. Just give me a yes or no. And if you want to hit on any certain points, please do so. And then we will, you know, adjourn. But okay, Councilman Kraus first, please.
Yeah, I just want one more. What I'm taking away from the conversation today, I think it is invaluable. Setting expectation for the department. What is the department's belief its expectation is? What is our belief? The expectation of the department is. What's the administration's belief of the expectation of the department is? Number two is compensation, whatever that might be defined as, whether it's monetary or I can't think of the word I want, in
Benefits,
nature. What?
And benefits in the way of
yes,
benefits.
right. You know, what is it? What is it that we can do to better understand compensation? And then something that Jason, you said earlier that I want us all to be mindful of, and that was the impact of Act 47 and what it did to decimate so many amenities that we were able to provide at one point in time. And Act 47 did not happen in a vacuum. It came through deliberate, conscious financial choices and decisions that councils before us made that led us to the brink of financial ruin. And the idea that we can fix the problems, and they're multiple problems but we have to view them through the lens of fiscal responsibility, so that, God forbid, it's taken us 20 years to recover from the impact and the damage 47 did. Not 47 didn't. 47 corrected it. It's the decisions that were made that led us to having to go under state receivership to get our financial house in order, and that we must always be mindful of every decision that we make to remedy the challenges and problems that we face are viewed through a responsible fiscal lens, that we never go back, repeat those mistakes again, and dig ourselves even further in the hole than we did the first time around.
And you know, I want to take the opportunity to thank you all both for being here. You know, it's not easy to come here and talk about, you know, these situations. A lot of these things we don't have answers for. But I want to thank council members for being here. And before I turn it over to you for any closing remarks that you might have, thank you both for being here. You know, it was very productive, I feel. I hope the talks continue and we can all kind of meet at some, you know, cooperation point. So with that, I'll turn it over to the administration first.
thank you, Councilman, for convening this hearing and giving us and the FOP an opportunity to talk about these issues with council and with the public. As it relates to the strategies or solutions that you laid out, I'd be remiss if I didn't note that many of them deal with topics that are subject to the collective bargaining agreement, right? And so I don't think it would be, appropriate for either of us, based on where that process is right now, to make firm commitments on any of them. But I think I can say from our end that yes, that's a dialogue that through the legal mechanisms of that process we've been having and are willing to continue having. So with that caveat, there are two things that you've laid out here that are not part of that conversation. The question of the fleet and the question of the training facility. And I'll reiterate things we said earlier today or in previous occasions, that we are committed to addressing both of those issues. As it relates to the fleet, I mentioned earlier, earlier today, we identified some additional funds to make further investment in the state of the fleet, the condition of the fleet. And we'll continue to look for those opportunities where we can. It's something we have to manage in conjunction with all of the other fleets, to Councilperson Strasburger's point, or Councilwoman Warwick, I forget who made this point precisely, right? But there's, there are also needs in fire and in DPW, right? So we have to manage all of those simultaneously, but this is one where we think we can make some progress. As it relates to the training facility, again, that was a situation last year where there was not a project ready to begin moving forward in a serious way. That there were older designs that weren't ready to be taken out for advancement, and at the same time those funds had been in the budget for a long time and were subject essentially to controller's close this year, and we, in the context where they're bond funds, that produces challenges where we're sitting on older money. So we did repurpose those funds to get shovel-ready projects completed where necessary. We are committed to a sort of right-sized project around training facility. When I say right-sized, I mean focused first and foremost on a training facility and meeting our training needs. The previous concept for that site was a lot broader and encompassed a lot of other moving pieces. I think that it is important to have those discussions as well, but we can advance a project around a training facility more quickly while ironing out some other questions there. So I spoke to Director Hornstein, who through DPW's facilities team is charged with planning those projects, about this last week, and about ensuring that we have a well-vetted proposal around that to bring to the council table in this year's budgeting process for 2024 to begin that process.
Good. That's good news on some fronts. I appreciate that. Bob, you or any of your...
Just briefly, just to correct, the FOP is not in agreement with changing the actual 20 years of basic retirement. We are in agreement to incentivize those that have 25 or more years on the job. So we would agree that you would retain the basic pension at 20 years. I just wanted that clear.
Did I not make that clear in our meeting the other day?
and at 25 years, we'd be interested. But first and foremost, I also would like to thank council for having this meeting, and the time and energy that all council persons have expended to allow us to have this open forum, because I will tell you, you are at a tipping point. And like all things, and I'm not one to sound the alarm, I've been here a long time, I've worked in the seat a long time, so are the two gentlemen to the right of me, and if we don't get it fixed, and we don't get it fixed fast, and we don't determine the mission of the police force, and any of these other ideas that we have to reduce that call volume, you're going to see a crime wave that's unprecedented. And I am not waving that flag like, oh, hey, I can look at your district, I can look at her district, I can look at where I live, and you just see it building and building and building. And until we get this corrected, we're in a big, and the only thing I would also like the public to understand is, do not judge us by the sins of others. Judge us by the sins of ourselves. In other words, judge the Pittsburgh police by what we do wrong. And then feel free to have that open conversation. If other agencies are doing certain things, make sure that you hold them accountable, just like we don't mind being held accountable for what we do. But please do not paint us with the same brush. just because our brethren or sisters have committed a misstep or something heinous. Judge us for what we do. And that's all that I can ask for this council or this community, that you judge the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police for what we do, right, wrong, or indifferent, and we'll be happy to accept responsibility. And I would also ask this administration to show some decency and support for Tom Stangrecki for the work he's had to put in while he's the interim chief, not knowing whether or not he keeps his job. And that's not because he and I agree, because he and I fight, and Joe Nicholas will tell you like crazy in a room. But he needs to be shown the decency and respect of 30-plus years of service and what he's done for this police force while he's been operating with minimal support.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And I want to thank everybody again. And I will say, yes, absolutely. I will say I have the utmost respect for Tom Stangrecki, too, and for all of our police officers. And I think what you say is important. You know, I've pulled the records of our Pittsburgh Police Department in the last 3 years. I went back for police stops. And, 52,000 plus stops. And this police department had one shooting. And that shot was fired at the police officer first, and he returned fire. So our record here, and I know the men and women who are on this Pittsburgh police force, I know I have nothing but respect for you all, and I think most of the people at this table do as well. Councilman Kraus?
The idea that Anthony or Councilman Cockrell brought up about a compensation package should a officer choose to go to another department, that the cost we incur to train a new officer,
Yeah.
and what was the second part of that?
Well,
There
we
were
get
two
like
costs.
our training costs back $8,000 or $10,000, but I said what we really need to do is set our price, and I don't know if we can legally do that, but our price is not $8,000 or $10,000. Our price should be $50,000.
Well, I don't want to go that far down
Yeah.
the road. But I would love if we could have an opinion from our solicitor on if there.
This is a well-established area of law in the state of Pennsylvania.
Thank you.
If an officer has been on the job for less than 2 years, 2 years or less, I should say it that way, and then leaves our department for our police bureau for another police force, we have the ability to recoup some costs, and the way in which those costs are calculated is in part dictated by that law. I think there might be, to the conversation we had last week, Councilman, some discretion that we could apply in modifying the way we produce that calculation. But it is limited to an officer who leaves within 2 years of completing their training, and it is limited to a fair recovery of the costs that we incurred to put them on the force. Though, admittedly, there is probably some gray in the way that calculation is derived, and we can take a look at ensuring that the way we're calculating those costs accurately reflects what it takes for us to put an officer on the street. If we're not charging enough now for whatever reason, we're certainly willing to explore that.
I didn't realize it was only 2 years, number one. I'm almost going to resort to, we just have to go to the borough police chiefs and say, please don't take our officers. At this point, I just don't know how we're going to stop that from happening, knowing that. So,
This was very helpful. Thank you,
no,
Councilman.
you're welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Everybody else good? Councilwoman, you guys have any questions? You guys have anything to add? Well, with that, I hope the conversation begins and the cooperation begins between the union and the administration, and I hope we can come up with some answers to what are very difficult questions. So with that, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.